Okay, good evening, everyone. For those that are viewing the webcast at the moment, we have 5 members of council here in the room. We understand that 2 other members of council are on their way here. So we're just going to delay the commencement to give them time to arrive. So thank you for your patience, as well as everyone in the room as well. Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this special council meeting of Thursday, September the 8th. As we begin, I do wish to acknowledge that we are meeting on the territories of the Sauk Nation. And just given today's world events, I do, on behalf of council, wish to send our condolences to the royal family on the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. She was a very dedicated public servant who served with grace, integrity, beloved by many. So may she rest in peace. So council, I'll turn your attention to tonight's agenda. The special council meeting was held specifically for consideration of amendments and second reading of the bylaw. Now, I know in terms of our council procedural bylaws, it's stated here that public input is not permitted because the public will have an opportunity to comment at the public hearing should that be scheduled. However, given the correspondence, timing of events and capacity and such, I'm wondering as we approve the agenda, there's two thoughts on this, that we allow public to comment as to not on specific items in the draft OCP, but on our decision tonight to proceed or not to proceed with second reading. So it would still need to be restricted because that's the intent of today. The piece to that, though, is that only allows those that are here tonight to comment. Others who may have wanted to attend may not be because they wouldn't have the opportunity to comment. So in fairness to those who might say, well, I would have liked to comment, and now because I didn't attend and I would watch the webcast or whatever, there is that component to consider as well. But this is something that we as a council would need to discuss together. So as we approve the agenda, that is my question. Would you want to allow public comment to address or to speak on that item? And that is to whether or not council should continue progressing or make perhaps a different decision tonight, or any of the options, or even another to receive for information. So that is the question I am asking. Councillor Logans.
Yeah, thanks for asking the question. I have no problem with public comment. I do understand both sides of it, but we have been receiving digital correspondence as well. My only question about if we allow it tonight is, so you're asking for it to be specific to whether or not we proceed, but is that like a yes or no question? Because people will have reasons for why they don't want us to proceed and therefore go into those reasons. Is that going against
that's
like
yeah. So when it gets into, for example, you know, a specific segment of the OCP, page 50, this section, whatever, then that is a piece where perhaps that is more particular for a public hearing. This would be more the case of public input as to, you know, why are we here tonight? What is the purpose of this meeting tonight? We were going through, as you know, everyone knows, page by page reviews. Then there was the one meeting for the DPAs. We talked at length about the timing and whether or not we have enough meetings to go through this. But then at the meeting that I was on vacation for, the decision was made to bring this all forward and for council to consider second reading. So it would be more public input as to should we be considering that tonight. So it does need to be, for those of you that are here, sort of specific as to weighing into particular sections of the OCP. Right? Thoughts, Councillor Beddoes, then St. Pierre?
Yeah, I think I don't have a problem with the public weighing in tonight. If people feel strongly about it and make themselves known here, then as a councillor, I feel I should hear them out. May not agree with them, but I mean, they certainly have the right to see us. So
yes.
I don't have a problem.
Okay,
As
Councillor.
long as it's controlled. I mean, I don't want to get it down into the weeds because that is coming up. That's fine.
Councillor St. Pierre?
I would agree. I think the public commentary would be useful. I tend to think that people will manage to very briefly, in non-specific ways, mention what they might think of the OCP, but that's what we want. So I think that's appreciated.
Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, I'm against this. I spoke to at least 8 to 10 people over the last couple of weeks, noting that, in fact, this is a closed meeting, council only. So they're not here. these 8 individuals in the room tonight have come, knowing that there was no public comment. So on that point, and if we do move ahead, I definitely think we need to set a strict time limit on comments. Thank you.
The comments would be restricted to the 2 minutes that any regular council procedure bylaw would have. Councillor Lajeunesse?
Yeah, I think we should allow the members of the public who are here to speak because I'm always happy to hear what the public has to say about what we're doing here.
Okay, so then as we approve the agenda, it would be an amendment. So I'd be looking and councillors can vote. This is a democratic process, so you're either voting in favor or not. If it fails, then we would just look to approve the regular agenda just to our corporate officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to note before you do move into this, motion to suspend the rules cannot be debated after the motion has been made, and it also requires a 2/3 vote. So it will
Okay.
require 5 of 7 to
So the
pass.
motion would be that I would need to look for then is that the meeting rules be can you restate that? The council procedural bylaw rules be suspended?
I would probably provide that section 3214 of the council procedure bylaw be suspended to allow 2 minutes public input on whether the bylaw should proceed.
Okay. So that would be the motion. I didn't write it down.
That council suspend section 3214 of the council procedure bylaw to allow 2 minutes public input on whether or not the bylaw should proceed.
Okay. Does everyone have that? 2 minutes per person. Not total. Okay, so that is a motion to consider. Would someone like to move that? Councillor McMath is moving. Councillor St. Pierre is seconding. Any comments on the motion from Councillor McMath as the mover? From the seconder? No? Anything from anyone else? No? So we've heard it's a majority 5 to prevail. So I'll call the question. All those in favor, please. Opposed? Councillor Bateman is opposed, so the motion carries. Okay, so on that, I'll invite members. That'll be our section 4 right now. Any members of the public wish to speak on that? It's basically as I've said, you've probably heard me say, not on particular items of the bylaw, but we're meeting here to consider amendments and to consider second readings. So if you would like to comment in that regard, that's an opportunity for you, and this is the time to do so. We would require your name, your full name, the local government that you reside in, and there's a 2-minute allotment per person.
Sorry, Your Worship, we haven't approved the agenda yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Okay, so then it would be that the agenda for the September 8, 2022 special meeting of council be adopted as circulated. Moved by Councillor Bateman and seconded by Councillor Beddoes. All those in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, now, pardon me, if I could go back to Mr. Saunders. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Your Worship, council, staff, citizens. Thank you for affording us this time to speak. I honestly wish it had been afforded when the council chambers were full, because a group from that meeting, when they weren't allowed to speak, asked me to represent them. I'm not here representing them tonight because I haven't had a chance to talk to them, because I just heard that it may be a public participation here tonight. What I'm saying very clearly from my family's perspective is that this OCP process ought to stop right now. One of the main reasons is because you are actually on the traditional territories of 2 First Nations, and their comments aren't reflected in this document at all. And in looking at the urban systems that have just sent you the information with respect to the referral comments, of which I was very concerned with, that the Sooke Nation hasn't commented, the archaeological branch hasn't commented. Most importantly, School District 62 hasn't commented. When you look at the document, you talk about equitable and respectful. I'll be blunt, is that this hasn't been respectful to the group that I represent, hasn't been respectful to my family. It hasn't been that new era of collaboration, such as what's in this OCP. And I'm missing my daughter's surprise birthday party because of it right now. I'm not very happy about it, but this is important to my family. This is the worst OCP I've ever seen in Sooke. I don't say that lightly. It's the worst planning that I've ever seen in Sooke. I don't say that lightly. And all I ask you to do, I did ask you to visualize or even attend with me so I can show you some of the stuff. I live, breathe in development. I save trees. I also take down trees. I do development. I do excavating. I simply want council or staff or any members of the public to simply take what's in the document right here, your mapping of land use designations and land use, and overlay it to your map, walk down to Whiff and Spit, look at the hillside, and this OCP clearly doesn't demonstrate any environmental regard with respect to maintaining and preserving trees whatsoever in relation to your designation here. And in fact, it will clear cut a very large portion of Sooke, all the way from your hillsides, all the way to the mill site. I don't say that lightly. And I ask anybody to prove me wrong. I'm happy to walk with you down at Whiff and Spit. The examples are already there on your hillside. It's easy to overlay. Thank you very much for allowing us to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Saunders.
Herb Haldane, 3118 C Otter Point Road. The only issue I have, and I've had it before and we've talked about, is the delegation of much of your authority to staff through this document. And one of the bigger issues I have is the fact that all of our bylaws come from this document. So they're based on whatever literature is thrown into the document, and then you make your bylaws off of that. And not that it's probably meant to for any reason, but the District of Sooke only follows the bylaws when they feel necessary to follow them. Other times they overlook them. So if we have staff that gets to decide whether or not a bylaw is enforceable today or not enforceable, there's nothing written in there that says they get that power. There's nothing written in there that says that council has that power, but council has the power to go through a public process so we can decide what's right or wrong or indifferent. Right now, if you want to get your fees and services bylaw that talks about what you pay for, if you want to get a title search done on your house, it says right in your bylaw, it costs $15. You go down to the District of Sooke, you ask for it, they give you a title search for $15. You cannot get a $15 title search if you come to the District of Sooke. They say, no, we don't do that anymore. They have it in the bylaw, but they don't do it anymore. Well, who gets to decide that they don't do it anymore? Is it the girl at the counter? She says, no, it's not her. She doesn't decide that. Goes all the way up the ladder. You've got trailers on people's property right now. And not that I disagree with that, but you have them all over people's property, all over Sooke, but we're not enforcing that bylaw because we decided that that's not what we're going to do today. You've got suites and duplexes all over Sooke. Your building bylaw was done in 2020 there, and you had the opportunity to put suites in your building bylaw in townhouses and in duplexes, but you decided not to do that. But yet there's some 150 suites in duplexes around Sooke. So who decides that those now are or aren't enforceable? But a guy wants to plant plants in his front yard. I come to a meeting here, all the council agrees we should allow them to plant plants in their front yard so they can get their deposit back.
Thank you, Mr. Haldane. That's your 2 minutes.
Yeah, but in the end, it just comes down to who's deciding who gets to do what in the District of Sooke. It's definitely not council.
Okay, thank you. Oops. Okay, if anyone else would like to speak, please come to the microphone. Yes, Councillor
Could you
Bateman.
please reiterate your comments about what the subject commenters are to address?
The intent here is the decision on what we are doing, whether we are proceeding with second reading and moving to a public hearing. That is why we're here tonight, is to potentially consider second reading, to schedule a different dates, or to receive for information. So that is the intent of the public input. Next speaker, please. You just please turn on the microphone so we can all hear you. Thank you. Okay. You just need to turn it on. Right at this on the base there. Got it. Thank you.
Mick Road, 7885 West Coast Road. I'm thinking that you're doing the second reading and maybe we'll have a public open house later on. I think that's what you're discussing. And I've been talking to other candidates. And I was at the music festival this weekend, and a lot of people were concerned that there was a rush to push through the OCP, and it seems like there was a lot of consternation as to maybe it should be passed on to the next council. You know, you can do the second reading tonight, so to move it along. But I think, you know, because, you know, the COVID lockdown did lessen public engagement, and we had the one open forum, which there seemed to have been sort of a split decision on which way to go. But that's what you're here for, is to move it along. So I would just suggest that perhaps it can be delayed to the next council, because I'm sure that a lot of candidates will be discussing whether to move forward with the present revisions of the OCP. So that's going to be part of the debate, I'm sure. That's kind of, I got an earful on that. So I'm just saying, perhaps you should think about passing it on to the next one, because the 7 of you and everything, some of you might actually not be here, and the person that does take your seat, they may have a few things that they would like to bring to the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes.
Ellen Lures, 5526 Sooke Road. I'm totally opposed to this OCP going forward. Even reading the community correspondence, there's over 180 letters in here all opposing the OCP, not wanting it to go through. I totally agree with what David Saunders said about the destruction of Sooke, what will happen with this OCP. I didn't vote to pass it forward. I was the only dissenting vote to say, don't put this forward, because there's too much in it that was wrong. It isn't the vision of Sooke. It isn't the vision what people want. And I don't believe that there was enough input from the public. I had a lot of input from the public, and it's not reflected in this plan. And I would hope that council would not push this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lures.
Hello, Susan Belford. I think that it's a problem to tell the public that they won't be able to speak and then to change what you're going to do. It's not fair. I know if we had known that there were an opportunity to speak, a lot more people would have been here. So I think that it's important that once you've set a process, you need to follow the process through. I think that's the fair and just kind of governance that we should expect in a democracy. In terms of your work today, absolutely give the thing second reading. Give us a public hearing so that everybody can speak. And after the public hearing, you may decide, oh, we're going to leave this to the next council. Or, oh, we're going to pass it, but we're going to make these changes that we've heard from people that they need. That would be correct process. I guess that's all I have to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Belford. Anyone else? Okay. Oops, that concludes the public input portion. Thank you. Okay, so that takes us to item 5, which is the bylaw section. And we have quite a report here. However, I'm going to turn it over to staff now to take us through this report.
Thank you. As you can see in the report, there's a number of attachments that quite detail a number of revisions that have been made to the OCP throughout the subsequent workshops, as well as the open house that we held, as well as numerous pieces of correspondence from both the public and referral agencies, which have been taken into consideration. Urban Systems has done their best to compile a companion document that shows where these revisions have been made within that document, so that anyone seeing can see what the initial comment was and then how that comment was addressed, whether there was a change made or if no change was made. And then the other letters and pieces of correspondence have been attached as additional appendix for detail. Trying to get the slide to change here. Okay. So just to recap how we arrived at today's meeting. So following first reading on April 11th, we went forward with commencing the referral process. So that went out to all of our standard referral agencies for comment. And as well, the regional context statement was forwarded to the Capital Regional District for consideration. If you recall, we were working under a number of different timelines that were quite tight, given an initial consideration for having this adopted prior to the beginning of summer. While we were not successful in achieving that, we were successful in having this document presented to the CRD board for consideration, which they did accept. And that was specifically regarding the regional context statement, which is a section within this document. All other matters that have been considered since that time and have been revised have not affected the regional context statement. So we do not see there to be additional concern where this would have to be revisited by the Capital Regional District Board. At that same time, from April 12th to May 13th, we opened up a comment period for submission of comments on this as well. On May 7th, we hosted our open house at the community hall and received a number of pertinent pieces of information regarding these recommended changes to the document. And based on that information, we took that back to the planning group to include that in the revisions to this document. And in other areas, we worked on further communication as to why some of those revisions weren't going to be considered, and if they were applicable in other projects being considered by the district, such as anything transportation or wastewater related, for example. As I mentioned, May 18th was when the Planning Police Services Committee gave support to the regional context statement. And then following that, that was forwarded on to the Capital Regional District Board for acceptance to give us the green light to move forward with further bylaw process. And then on May 16th, June 15th, and July 19th, to recall, we held our committee of the whole workshops where we went through various sections of the document where council was able to provide input and gain any clarification that they might have had on specific sections. And again, a lot of that feedback has been captured and addressed in the companion document attached to this report. And then on August 31st, all of these revisions were compiled so they could come forward tonight here on September 8th. So to recap some of the highlights, the input that we received. So there's a summary of external referral comments that highlight each agency's input. There were a number of agencies that did not provide comment at this time, and we will continue to follow up with them for input. As we're seeing across the country, there are shortages in numerous departments, so that has created resource challenges for many agencies, including various levels of government, to report on certain aspects like a referral process. So we will follow up continuously. One area that I just want to flag for consideration, which will come up later on in the presentation, is comments from Beecher Bay, and it's regarding a parcel of land just off of Gillespie, just down Nagle Road, actually. It's approximately 160 acres, and just consideration of that parcel as part of their land settlement to go from a rural residential designation to a comprehensive development designation so that they can consider future development of those lands. So that was one request that I'll discuss further. As well, there is all of the public correspondence that has been received and taken into consideration. And as I mentioned as well, we as a group collaborated after the open house to discuss the feedback that we received and how that could be incorporated where appropriate throughout the document. And as you see in the companion document, that further lists where those explanations and revisions have been made. So a summary of the concerns that we heard. So the 30-meter foreshore setback was something that council heard very early on in the process that was a concern and had been addressed through the revision to a 15-meter setback. What I'd like to highlight tonight is also staff's receipt of the concerns still from the open house and what we've done to address those concerns. Primarily what we heard were concerns from single family homeowners, duplex and other small property owners on the foreshore, where they were concerned that these requirements were going to be triggered. So under the exemption section, if you're a single family home, a duplex, or you're looking to do renovations or construct an accessory building, you could fall under the exemption section so that the foreshore area would not be applicable. And we felt that was a good response based on the feedback that we're hearing that seemed to be primarily those concerns. The foreshore would still be applicable where we see primarily in the town center area waterfront, where those larger developments could have an impact, and these guidelines would help direct where this type of development could be appropriate based on these guidelines. The next one, the waterfront development restrictions, again, addressing those through our DPA development permit area exemptions. Based on that feedback, similar to the 30-meter foreshore, if we can provide those exemptions, that provides much more flexibility and not adding those perceived costs that were of concern to applicants, and helping address the planning processing of these files. Costs and delays from development permitting. Again, we've addressed that through the exemptions pieces of the development permit areas. And as well, it was mentioned earlier about a delegated authority. What we have currently in the process is a bylaw that delegates authority to specific designated staff to review and approve certain applications based on a criteria, and all other applications as required through the Local Government Act would still come forward to council for consideration. So in an effort to work with applicants to create a timely process for applications, those applications that could be considered minor in nature, having minimal impact, could be considered by council to enter the delegated authority realm, where we could have those come forward to staff and be considered and approved if meeting all of the guidelines. So we wanted to do that in a way that met the needs of the community, met the guideline requirements, and did not create additional work where there would be multiple items being put forward on a council agenda, where it would be more appropriate and acceptable for council or for staff to have that delegated authority. And lastly, the cost of implementing the OCP. As council actually included as one of the components to the growth projections in the document, how it does not bind future councils to those statistics, that they are just projections at that, and council can change those or use different projections in the future. So too are a lot of the actions within the OCP. Council's not committed to completing all of these actions within the document. This is a high-level document that sets a guiding piece for council to follow, and then through other more detailed plans, policies, strategies, implementing them at a more detailed level. So therefore, in terms of costs, for one, it would be very difficult to anticipate what these costs are, because they could occur at any time frame from a 5 to 10 or later period of time, where costs could be completely inflated or different, and they would be more appropriately addressed through the annual budgeting process. And at that time, again, as a public process, public could weigh in on those pieces of the bylaw that might be considered for inclusion in our budget, which are arising out of the OCP. So that's another piece where cost has been addressed and can be addressed in future through the budgeting. On the support side, there was both pieces of support for the 30-meter and 15-meter setbacks. And so ultimately, in the end, the council made the decision to go with the 15-meter setback. And then lastly, the support for passing the OCP in 2022. And so tonight, based on what is being presented, council will have the opportunity to consider second reading as amended, and then whether to proceed with a public hearing, tentatively considering for September 27th as a date for that public hearing. Some of the key messaging that came across through the correspondence, the alleviating of traffic issues. So objective 4.1.1, which is the beginning of the transportation policy section, mentions the implementation of our existing transportation master plan. More specifically, the comments that we heard of concern currently in Sooke is the traffic network, and that there's one way in and one way out heading into Victoria. So again, reaffirming the need to consider the establishment of a secondary crossing over the river so that we can have those additional paths for transportation to help that process to begin alleviating our traffic concerns. So it is still on the radar, but most importantly, that the transportation master plan is that key guiding document that provides more detail than what the OCP can provide on how we're going to move forward over the next decade with our transportation strategy. Another key message is the request for language and zoning changes. And so council recall the change is made to Farrell Estates Westridge Trails to have that included as part of the community residential designation. And then, as I had mentioned earlier, council tonight can consider the Beecher Bay lands for a comprehensive development designation, which currently is shown on our map as a rural residential designation. Another message was the request for waterfront access improvements. And through our development permit areas and any future development applications that come in, those will continue to be considered, along with any other legislation that may come forward in future that provides for that shoreline access and how we incorporate that into our town center. Lastly, the request for job creation and employment. This will be further addressed through the employment land strategy, which we have committed to begin once the OCP has been adopted so that we can use that as a guiding tool with the consultant to develop the employment land strategy, as well as our currently adopted community economic development strategy and action plan. So that has a number of other areas where we can focus on job creation and employment within the community. So this map, as I mentioned about the Beecher Bay lands off of Gillespie Road, you can see here the starred parcel. That's the one in question that Beecher Bay has requested be considered for incorporation into the community development designation. What that will do is allow for further detailed planning on those lands should they wish to come forward with a development application. It's not within a reserve. It's currently just as part of the land settlement with, oh, sorry, okay. Our screens were turning off. Are your screens still visible? Okay. Okay. Let's go. Okay. It's good. All right. So yes, so those lands transferred over to Beecher Bay as part of the land settlement agreements. And so we have an opportunity to work with Beecher Bay in future when they do have more detailed planning available to go through that land use planning process. So I do have a motion crafted following this for consideration. Sorry, I'm seeing concern with the screens again.
Yeah.
You just hold the button on the back of your monitors and then turn it off.
Good. All right. Oh.
Is there a way to maybe turn one of those big screens? I don't want it to be the webcast. But then we can break the phone. Everyone on every possible that. Thank you, Mr. Powell. Sorry about the technology.
That's okay. I'll come prepared with overheads next time. So this starred parcel is the landing question. So I have that motion prepared, I believe on the next slide after this, just to consider that inclusion. It would not be marked off as a community growth area as shown by the other comprehensive development areas. For inclusion of a parcel beyond what's currently within our municipal boundaries to be a community growth area, that would have to go through an amendment process with the Capital Regional District and their regional growth strategy. So at this time, designated as comprehensive development would at least provide the initial steps to begin the conversations of a planning process with Beecher Bay. And then at future time, when they are ready and we can have that dialogue with the Capital Regional District, as future amendments will likely be considered for their regional growth strategy, we can consider that inclusion if necessary, based on what Beecher Bay's future planning proposal may include. Okay. Oh. I can see it appearing on some of your screens and then it's flickering on the screen here. Okay. Good. No. Okay. So based on that, those are the high level revisions that have been made. I believe that with the DPA exemptions, that was the biggest point that we heard throughout the process, specifically the riparian and foreshore areas and how that was being applied to single family homes, duplexes and accessory buildings. So through the exemptions that would provide a lot more flexibility for landowners to continue tending to the land as they currently have been. And at the same time, addressing larger density developments that would benefit from the application of those guidelines where applicable. Through this referral process, we have sent it off to legal counsel for review and they have submitted their comments back, which our consultants did include in the revisions as well. So those are added to this process. And with consideration of the amendments and second reading tonight, we can proceed if council wishes to a public hearing where further input can be given based on the revisions that are accepted tonight. So that would further allow for additional input and the public to understand what changes have been made and now amended into this document. With that, that concludes my presentation on this piece and happy to answer any specific questions that council may have based on the revisions that have been included in the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Paulo. Just some opening questions that I have. Some of them are the case that the referral agencies, if not all, some have responded and not all, obviously. What do we do to follow up with those other agencies?
That would be additional correspondence, whether phone calls, emails, excuse me, to confirm whether they do have concerns or not. And if there are concerns, what is their anticipated timeline for response back to staff so that we can bring that forward to council for further consideration.
So have we done that, given that some, we were sort of pushed to get a timeline in? I mean, early on, it was all about making the CRD committee, then subsequent board meeting, because there's only a few meetings left. And so that was done, obviously. But some of the others, what follow-up measures have we taken? I mean, I see some ministries have replied, but archaeology hasn't, and that's a big deal.
Mm-hmm. So some phone calls have been made to those agencies that have been identified as not providing a response. At this point, we would like to again follow up with them who have not provided a response still, and just confirm if their intent is to provide a response or that they have no concerns. Sometimes it is the instance of agencies to not provide a comment and for that to be taken as no concern. But however, in this instance, we would like to exhaust all further correspondence with them to confirm that if they are intending to respond, that is the case. As I mentioned earlier, due to staffing challenges across the country, many governments at multiple levels are challenged to provide timely correspondence. So we'd like to just kind of check that box and make sure that if something's coming in, that council's made aware.
Okay, my other piece was on the emails that have come in from members of the public. It's hard to go through this. Some part of it is because this is a very large PDF. It took me many different ways to actually get to be able to open and read it. And I'm not a lay person when it comes to technology, so I can imagine what folks at home are going through as they try to see this themselves. Anyway, that said, it's difficult to see if how is this public feedback through email captured, because we've received numerous ones. We try to send them all to info and to make sure that they're all captured. So is that how those emails are? And then the other piece is some have personal information redacted and some do not. So part of it too is if you want to talk to somebody and understand more about their intentions, I have no idea who to connect with unless I go through now and match what I have in my inbox with what's on here. And in some cases I can do that. But then it's almost administerial and I'm not actually reading the emails. I'm matching up content and not even really processing what is sent to me. So that I find that challenging in this way. So is it everything? And then there's many in regards here to Connie Road, of which I understand we're doing work. So I don't understand why those are even in here, but I also don't understand why some have, some have contacts, like I know who they are and others I don't. So I don't understand that imbalance.
Yeah, so anything that was marked as correspondence for the purposes of the OCP review were taken into consideration. Now, whether the details within that correspondence were relevant to the OCP was a matter for staff to review and then consider how it was applicable as part of the revision process. That's why with Appendix C, public correspondence, a thematic approach was undertaken to group a lot of these comments of a similar nature to then summarize what was the concern or matter being commented on, and then what was the approach taken to then address that concern. In some instances, there may have been a revision. In other instances, there was no change based on perhaps the change was already made with the foreshore as an example, or the change would then not bring about compliance within the document. So that's where the public correspondence Appendix C outlines those pieces. So it mentions, for example, the area of concern in the OCP. So the section, the area of concern specifically as a summary, the number of mentions of how many times in the public's correspondence the public were mentioning that, and then addressed by edits. And so in some instances it says no change, or yes, this has been removed, or this has been updated with whatever the item relevant to it is. So that is how that information has been changed. Another one, opposition to tree management bylaw. The action taken there for the public correspondence was that language has been updated to refer to policy as opposed to the bylaw. That was a discussion of council as well.
Okay, so I'm aware of that, but in this case, some edits were made because of the email that came from the member of the public.
So some changes were made based on conversations that council had as part of the workshops, conversations that we had as part of the open house, and then the correspondence. So it's a matter of putting all of that information together and making sure that if we are making a change to the document, that it is relevant for that change. It's not going to create inconsistencies throughout the document. So for the most part, you'll see no change was made because it was not consistent with the overall vision for the document.
Okay. Okay. I had one other question, but I'll go to members of council and come back, or pardon me, I am going to ask this before I just remembered it. So I wasn't as I mentioned, I was on vacation when council met. And I'm hearing two pieces out of this. I heard members of council ask staff about the capacity to do this work while also looking at the day-to-day needs of our district and the ongoing sort of operational parts. And I sort of heard two things. I heard that staff have the capacity and there would be no disruption to service. And I also heard that there will be a disruption and everything will slow down as a result of. And so I'm hearing two different things from members of council. So I guess the truth lies in the middle somewhere. However, I will share that I've been fielding a lot of calls over the last months about delays in service, no replies, and feedback, waiting. And when it comes to me, it's a very angry and difficult call to take. So I appreciate that folks were on vacation, but that's how I spent mine. And if I sound a little petulant about it, I also don't feel I'm the secretary to be doing and running around and doing that job. So it leaves me in just a place of frustration and quite angry, actually, that is how I spent my summer, because it does feel that there was a service disruption. I hear that this document, has over 2,000 touch points. Well, I get that on a weekly basis. Sometimes while I'm waiting to use a bathroom somewhere, and this is what I'm hearing. It's a very awkward and place to be, but that's my job. I get it. However, it feels to me that it was a result of this work occurring. But I want to hear from council sort of what you've heard and what you've seen, because that is just my perspective sitting here. I feel it's a valid one, even though I'm often told I'm just one of 7. It's been a rough go. I'm just sharing it because that is where I'm at this particular moment. Okay. Members of council, Councillor McMath, questions, then Councillor Beddoes.
Was it a sole staff member, through worship to staff? Was it a sole staff member who sorted through all of that correspondence?
It's a combination of district staff and urban systems, our consultant.
And so how did each person, if working individually, decide what was pertinent, what was pertinent to the OCP? Like, what were your parameters?
So there was meetings held between staff and the consultant to discuss the correspondence that had been received and how the matter would be addressed. And so in the companion document, there's a number of comments there where I think August 12th was the date, if I recall, where it said no changes made based on meeting with staff. So there was a collaborative approach to what staff had discussed as part of the workshop meetings, and then internally, and then the consultant's review of it and highlighting this matter has not been addressed. How do you wish to proceed with it? So it was a collaborative approach.
So what happens?
Councillor
when...
McMath, it seems that some members in the room of the public can't hear you. Can you speak up a bit?
Sure can. So when you filter through and you decide what is pertinent, what's not pertinent, what happens to the remainder, like the remaining pieces? For me, like, that process seems a little bit backwards. It would be that you compile every one of those entries and every one of those points, you compile it all together and then have generalized points. And then it would be up to us to decide what is pertinent to the OCP and what's not.
So as part of the administrative process, what happens is that is the feedback that comes in. A draft was prepared, was given first reading. That is the high level direction of the document. And so in terms of consistency, that is what is being presented. And for simplicity, for the public to review, as well as council and any other viewers, the thematic themes that were being presented as part of the public correspondence in the appendix. So that is the information of what is relevant. How we filter through is based on the direction of the document. Is this something that we heard consistently as a necessary request of the public, or is this something that is inconsistent? So we had the open house that provided great feedback from the public, as well as the ongoing public correspondence. And that's where the table set up really illustrates where are those themes and what has been addressed. So out of 53 pieces of similar correspondence regarding the foreshore and how that was being addressed, that change was made.
I'll go back to the open house later, not right now. Going back to the timeline of the creation of the OCP, when the OCP committee saw the first draft of the new OCP, where did that come from?
So when the committee saw the first draft of the OCP, so once all of the work was compiled, and this was the first document that the committee saw, that information came from all of the engagement sessions and background pieces that had been created up to that date.
And then when did that group see the previous OCP for a comparison?
The previous OC, the current one that's in place now. So the committee was provided with all necessary documents. So official community plan, transportation master plan, all of the other documents, as well as some additional district plans that they had requested that we originally didn't have on our list to provide. So a number of members made requests and we provided that information to them. Included was the official community plan that we currently have in place.
What I'm trying to sort of sort out in my own head, at least, is there's components and pieces, and including like in policy of the OCP where I can't find where they originated from. Didn't seem to me that it was a community ask. We'll use the 15-meter setback as an example. And then you're referring to the open house, but that was brought back again. And for someone who has such a limited time, they can't get full comprehension of that. So I don't think like the OCP open house is a great reference for communication or connection with the community, because it actually created a lot of confusion. So when we have made a motion to not approve a tree bylaw, how does a tree bylaw end up back in the OCP?
There isn't a tree bylaw in the OCP. It talks about a policy.
Right. So if we have voted that we do not want that, how does that make its way into the OCP?
I believe there was a discussion previously at our workshop that highlighted the fact that we weren't going to have a bylaw and that a policy would be the better approach to do that. So that was a conversation of council at the workshop.
So if council isn't looking for that, and if Sooke has said they're not interested in that, I still don't understand how it's woven itself in there. And because if we go back to a previous meeting that we've had, when you pulled, it's like the ATV or all-terrain community, because you had concerns that it gave them freehold to rip across anybody's property. And then there's another policy piece where people who have limitations might possibly be paid to come to meetings. I'm getting confused around where are the rules, and like I'm getting mixed messages. So on one hand, staff wanted to remove the all-terrain because you felt it gave them free lead. But then on the other hand, in a policy section, it said that we would financially compensate people. And then the next following message is that, well, no, we don't have to stick to anything. And so I'm just getting confused. I'm getting mixed messages and I'm getting a lack of clarity or where some of these pieces have come from, because it doesn't sound like they've come completely from the community. Like they're odd to me as priorities.
The community, through an engagement process, whether it's an OCP or any other type of engagement process, will provide information that's high level. And for those community members that have more knowledge on specific areas, they can assist by providing specific details to these items. But it's that information through the engagement process that the community provides that then staff are tasked with, as well as any hired consultants, to go through and figure out how does this actually work from an administrative standpoint. And that's where policies are developed beyond general feedback that is received. And so that's where some of these pieces, yes, it may not have been a specific detail that a community member had mentioned, but when we're talking about climate action goals, other transportation initiatives, or anything arts and culture related, there is a little bit more detail that can be put into the document based on best practices and other learned experiences from other jurisdictions that have incorporated similar types of directions for the community. So that's part of the piece where you have consultants come and assist based on their knowledge base to help a community move forward in that process to achieve their vision. So yeah, there's a number of items that the district may not have said specifically, but when we talk about climate action as an example, a number of people didn't say anything specific to it. But if we're supposed to be meeting our targets, here's a number of initiatives that are going to help us meet those targets. And as we start to scale things back, it's probably going to become a lot more challenging to meet those targets.
When maybe we'll bring it up, you have bullet points on one of your slides here about the financial implications of the OCP. And so I'm getting a lot of parallels with the climate action plan, where we want to work towards certain things, but we do have financial limitations. And so we're short-staffed. You have basically the entire development community coming and waving a red flag saying a lot of these pieces are counterintuitive to their mission. So in your opinion, where is the communication breakdown here?
So I've spoken with all sides of the development community. And yes, there are a number that were concerned with the cost of doing development, and through a number of the development permit exemption areas, we feel that we've addressed some of those concerns. In other areas, there has been requests from the community to have something like a secondary crossing of the river. That's going to have a huge cost implication, and I'm not sure where that's going to come from, but that's a request that we've included in there. So it all varies. Unless somebody undertakes development, there shouldn't be a large cost implication to that development, unless it's something that's being passed across the entire community. And so at that point, we're looking at a much larger planning process beyond just the official community plan. The official community plan is setting that high level guiding piece, and then the other detailed plans are going to discuss specifically how is that going to be accomplished.
So this is where I get confused.
Councillor McMahon, can I let other councillors ask some questions? I'll come back to you.
Yes,
Okay,
of course.
Councillor Beddoes is next, then St. Pierre, and then Bateman.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. This is just to ask questions, correct? This isn't to make statements of things. So I heard from staff and concern of yours that it's taxing staff to have this public hearing on the 27th, and yet we hear that they're able to do it on the 27th. So we're capable of doing a public hearing on the 27th with the information we have. Is that correct?
So my comments at the last workshop regarding staff resources was regarding if we were to proceed with the OCP, that is something that can be accomplished. However, there may be an impact to the day-to-day pieces. And so the decision was made at the workshop to proceed on with the OCP. Again, we can continue on to a public hearing on September 27th. Again, that may have an impact to the day-to-day pieces of the planning and development department. So it is achievable, but it can come at the cost of day-to-day pieces.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor St. Pierre.
I just want to comment specifically on the tree bylaw, tree policy, which was discussed at length in the Land Use Development Committee.
Sorry, there's a point of order from Councillor Logans.
Isn't this a question period?
Yes, that's what Councillor St. Pierre is asking the question. You know?
I was curious about something, yes.
Okay,
Yes, he's just framing it. Okay.
So what I'm curious about is what were the actual votes? Because my understanding is that council was quite split. My understanding in terms of the community input, it was quite split. I don't think it was quite as cut and dry as it sounds like. And I'd like some clarity on that, because it sounded like we were entirely opposed unanimously to a tree bylaw. And I seem to recall that it was actually quite close, but I don't have that information.
Councillor, or pardon me, Mr. Powell, are you able to answer that?
If I recall, it was very much a 50-50 decision on the matter, and it was believed best to approach it from an education and policy standpoint to work with the community on that piece. So the bylaw being viewed as more of a a very mandatory piece, whereas having a policy and educational format to work with the community on tree preservation would be a softer, potentially more successful approach.
I believe our corporate officer has some additional information.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The April 25th regular meeting, council did consider a report about the tree management process and what we were looking at. The report was received, which basically was not to proceed with a bylaw, and that vote was 5-2. And then there was a subsequent motion to staff to develop an education and support program. And then there was some various wording, but that ended up passing 6-1.
Okay, thank you. Follow up, another question, Councillor St. Pierre, just turn your mic on and just speak up a little louder.
I don't know if this information will be easy to find, but I believe that the breakdown of public engagement on the tree bylaw was 51% against and 49% for. And again, this speaks to an appetite for something to be done, but I'm curious.
Okay, there's a point of order, so I need to stop the meeting. What's the point of order?
Questions. not statements right now.
Okay, are you building up for a question? Okay,
Is it fair to say that this is what actually informed, including the policy language around trees into the OCP? And that the public engagement reflected it for the OCP as well? Because kind of like Councillor McMath, I don't actually see how a lot of stuff got translated into the OCP, so I don't see that information.
Yeah, yes, that's part of it. As you mentioned, the land use committee discussions as well regarding that process. So ultimately, based on the motion and subsequent motion read by the corporate officer, that is how we arrived at the policy piece. So it's a number of pieces that have developed over the course of almost 2 years.
Councillor Bateman, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bylaw, for getting us to this stage. Much appreciated. I was interested in why we don't have in front of us the minutes or notes from the chapter review sessions, so we can be sure that, thank you for the track changed version, which was useful. However, it would have been interesting to see exactly what we all have said over those 3 meetings. Was there a reason for that?
That hadn't been something to consider with the inclusion of the attachments. We were certainly focused on the track changes piece to highlight those mentions, but yeah, I certainly understand your comment regarding those minutes.
Yeah, so it did make it difficult, not entirely difficult, but it was a bit of a challenge to track exactly what had changed within the document. One, and I'll also note, it would have been very useful to see in this agenda this material around the Shannon and the Beecher Bay land. To make a decision on that without any material in front of me is challenging. So I'd like to go to page 29 of the August update, and that's population and demographics. And thank you for the note. The district of Sooke and its elected councils have the ability to challenge, reject, and re-envision these population projections. However, I see we jumped now to 34,561 people living in Sooke by 2050. The previous number was 25,000, so we have almost 10,000 more residents of Sooke. I'm curious, A, where did that number come from and who supplied it? I guess Collier's International.
So that the stat updates assistance was provided from our consultants, Urban Systems, based on that information. So they use the updated 2021 data where available to update the stats within the document.
Yeah, I have great trouble seeing that number in this document, particularly given that the CRD population projections through the regional growth strategy, which is a governing document for us, states 22,000 by 2038. We have 25. Anyway, I'm sincerely challenged by that material. As we move along, I'll leave out the minor items, which I'm famous for, but we'll focus on, there was to be a mention of compassion somewhere within the document. That did not make it into the document. I'm curious on page 178, development permit areas. 178. From exemptions has been removed the exemption on removal of the hazardous trees. Quote, removal of a tree when there is imminent danger of the tree falling and causing an injury to persons or property, or when a tree failure has already occurred as a result of a natural cause and presents an immediate hazards. However, that's been removed. There's good reason for that, I'm sure.
So based on the changes to the development permit areas where we talked about single family dwelling, duplex, accessory buildings, farm buildings, we removed that because it wasn't something that was going to be requiring a development permit. So it's just general maintenance of the lands. So we kind of condensed that piece, and then yard and garden work within existing landscaped area just remained. So correct.
Okay, off I go again. What's that? The question's coming. It's always there, Councillor McMath. Yeah, I just try to take it deep. So yes, so in terms of ensuring that applicants will work with the district prior to a prescription of a qualified professional and reports. So how have you modified in that regard?
Just trying to jump to the section because we did So sorry, your question was how will staff work with an applicant to determine what? So having those guidelines in place upfront should assist with future applicants to determine if a specific study is required. We do have the general section talking about development information that may need to be required. So like a geotechnical report when related to steep slopes, stormwater management plan, traffic impact assessment, et cetera. So based on having those more detailed guidelines, that should provide the applicant with the understanding of, oh, this will be something that is required with submission of an application, or I fit into this criteria and I will not be required to submit that information. And so when they do submit the application in, if there's a follow-up and staff is asking for something, staff will be able to say, based on this guideline, this is why we're asking for it. We understand it. It may have been missed in the initial submission, or vice versa. The applicant can say, based on some additional detail that I'm going to provide you with, I see it fit that I don't have to be subject to these requirements. So it at least provides those guidelines for us to have that discussion with the applicant. But first and foremost, the upfront conversation piece for them to be aware when they start that application process. When something is not required, then yes, we're not trying to.
7.12 development approval information area, which is new to this version of the document. Can you tell us about it, please? That's on page 236, agenda page 482.
Thank you for your references. It helps. On 7.12 development approval information area. So this was information that was provided through the legal review, just in terms of what we're asking for with information. So by having this contained within our development permit areas section within the OCP, it allows us as staff to make these requests as opposed to having them elsewhere and the applicants questioning why these may be requirements. So having the development approval information area indicates why certain information is needed and how we go through that approval process.
You picked this best practice up from the city of Duncan, I believe. Did I hear that? Read that correctly.
Yes, that was an example applied following the legal review comments that we had had.
Okay. Well, I'll throw in one more. We're on page 201 of agenda page 447, and under the this is architectural expression guidelines for the town center, and you've removed low embodied carbon emissions from the selection, the prioritization of the selection of building materials. And I'm curious about that, to remove that, given that Butler construction is leading the way in embodied carbon cement.
If I recall, I believe that may have been something flagged as part of the legal review, but also more appropriate as we go through a future process for addressing climate action initiatives like low carbon body materials, that would be a standalone policy that we could refer to.
Thank you, Councillor Bateman. Councillor Lajeunesse. Speak into the microphone.
Sorry, I was muted. I just have one question regarding community engagement. So on page 32 of the latest draft, it talks about the broad community engagement that was involved. And it lists off all of the local schools, parks such as Whiff and Spit, John Phillips Memorial, Broom Hill, and local businesses, including coffee shops and grocery stores. But nowhere in that list do I see how we captured the engagement from working people, 74% of which work outside of the community and have to commute. And I'm just wondering, at what times of day were these community engagement sessions held, and how did we capture actual working people?
So that's where it's a multi-engagement process with having these sessions throughout various periods of the day, as it mentions coffee shops and other locations, but then also the online component as well. And then the phone calls and emails that would have been submitted from interested parties wanting to participate in the process. So the combination of online presence as well as the in-person opportunities were available to those who wish to seek out opportunities to participate in the process. And then as we got closer to a draft building into opportunities to participate at the open house that we had at the community hall, as well as our festival that we had in John Phillips. And then lastly, those who have come to council to receive more information. So in person and digital in various formats.
Okay, Councillor Logans, any questions? Okay, any other questions from members of council? Councillor Bateman?
I'm curious about the public hearing and what would be the format and the setup of that public hearing in terms of this council's engagement and
I want to add to that question,
Yeah,
if I may. Also, my understanding in a public hearing is that, so all questions are directed to a public hearing. Should it run late, council would schedule another day for another public hearing, and it would continue on until a time where all members of the public that feel they have a stake in this feel heard. As I looked at my chair notes here, it's also not the function for council to debate merits of the proposed bylaw. It's rather to listen here. So between the days that this occurs, is it like a jury that's sequestered where you cannot be on the street hearing from others? Like it's strictly in chambers only?
Through your worship, the public hearing won't have been closed if we continue on to a second day. So what staff had initially thought was that if we do proceed with September 27th, that potentially we continue that on the next day on the 28th, and we have reserved the space to do that. Then we also can announce at the public hearing on the 27th that it has been adjourned to the 28th. We don't have to go through notifications and all of those things again. But the part that applies to council not receiving new information is only once a public hearing has been closed. So given that it is adjourned, it's still okay to hear from people as long as that public hearing has not been closed.
Okay, and then after the public hearing closes, then council has the ability to move third reading and adopt it in the same meeting, or can then then it is finding another meeting date. But in that time, once it officially closes, it is closed. So council cannot be out discussing it in the streets.
Yes, staff would suggest that a special meeting also be included with that public hearing so that council could consider third reading and adoption following the close of the public hearing, and then you don't need to worry about receiving new information. Or
Okay,
it could be considered at the October 3rd meeting, or it would then go to a new council after the election.
okay. The other piece to that then is it would occur here in chambers, because this is where we have the webcasting and all those pieces. Our public capacity is about 100 additional people in addition to council and staff.
Yes, through your worship, we have also arranged to have the fire lounge available, and the TV monitor that is in there will be broadcasting the web stream. So everybody will be receiving the same information. I'm assuming that we will hear from the people that are sitting in council chambers, take a bit of a recess, swap it over. Those that want to stay and watch can, and any that were in the lounge that want to come and speak to council would then come into council chambers. So that's how we're envisioning that piece proceeding, if it's council's wish.
Okay, the other piece to that is then, okay, council hears, this is a real challenge, this needs to be amended. So in this case, then it would come down to council saying, okay, on page 28, I make a motion that we amend this language, and then you would need a mover and a seconder, and then we would start a series of amendments to this, because this is where, this is my struggle here. We hear everyone, agrees and disagrees differently on how well we've consulted, engaged. Everyone has an opinion there. However, if something comes forward, and I know we're sort of seeing it, how do we then address that? So, and make that change to this draft. It would be getting support around the table to start amendments.
Yes,
then.
exactly as you're suggesting. After the close of the public hearing, when you're considering third, you would put those other items forward, pass your motions, and then third reading would be given as amended to include whatever changes you wanted and had passed by the majority of council.
But then there wouldn't be another public opportunity to comment on those amendments. Once it would just solely be up to council to take, what passes, what doesn't. And then that would be the new amendment to the draft. There wouldn't be any other avenue for the public to say, oh, they did that,
That's correct. And that would be the same for any bylaw that goes
Right.
to a public hearing. You
Yeah.
hear from the public, and then based on that input, you can then make any changes at third reading and amend the bylaw at that point without any further public input. The idea is that everybody who wanted to comment had been at the public hearing. And if third reading is considered immediately following the public hearing, they would still be there for that, to hear that input, but wouldn't be able to comment on it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor St. Pierre?
I do have one further, one further question, and that's a series of small questions for clarification. It's about the delegation of power to staff. My understanding is this would deal with smaller matters, but I don't doubt that any applicant that gets a positive response will go away happily if they have a response from staff to that effect. Those that are denied, probably because staff definitely has to operate within the rules and can't actually change them. I believe the recourse is to come to council, but I'd like clarification on that and confirmation. I'd like to know whether or not they would be informed that that is their recourse. And I'll start with those two.
Yes, the intent of the delegated authority is to alleviate congestion on the council agenda with items that could appropriately be heard by staff for a decision on these development permits. In the instance of a development permit that was refused by staff, the applicant could appeal to council for council to then reconsider that development permit, and then council's decision would prevail on that application. So it does not stop with council or with staff. It has that opportunity to go to council if the applicant is not satisfied with their decision on the application.
Does staff communicate this information to applicants if their development permit is refused for whatever reason?
We haven't, since my time here, I have not refused a development permit application, but in the instance where an application was refused, we inform staff or applicants of what the next steps are in the process. We also cite which bylaws are applicable. So there is a delegation authority, which also then clearly details the next steps of where things go. In all instances where I've been involved in the question of whether an application is a delegated authority or not, when an applicant has been informed that the file is a delegated authority, they're quite pleased to hear that.
Thank you.
Councillor Bateman.
In terms of if we move to second reading tonight, is that incumbent on us to then hold a public hearing, or can you have a second reading and then without the public hearing?
Yeah, that would be up to council to direct whether you want to proceed on the 27th and we do the appropriate advertising or not, and to hold a public hearing after the new council has taken office.
Okay, any other questions, Councillor McMath?
Do we have secondary dates aligned for a public hearing?
There's September 27th and 28th are tentatively in the schedule.
And if we go beyond those dates?
We don't have anything. I'm not aware of anything beyond that.
Okay, and then, so ideally, we have this public comment period, and we are holding our amendments and our recommendations and our motions till we know that the public hearing will be closed. Because should we make an amendment or a motion, it can no longer be discussed. So if people don't get a chance to speak, it's 11 o'clock at night, and then we make a motion, that person that stayed to the end who wants to speak to that can no longer speak to that.
Let me see, I'll try to answer this.
Yeah.
So we have the public hearing as we open it, and we hear from all the speakers. Let's say it's 11 o'clock and council, we need to have that motion to meet past 11, I believe, 11, I think. And we lose quorum for whatever reason, then we adjourn the public hearing to the next date. As you know, council's there, and we continue on in that way. Once the public hearing closes, that is when council would begin the amendments. Yes?
Sorry, I didn't hear what she said. My apologies.
So with any amendments that members of council would want to make to this bylaw, that would start after the public hearing closes.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
And then because it's closed, we can no longer receive information from the public. And then it would just be up to council majority vote to make those amendments. And then they would be made into the document. And then that document or the document would be amended for third reading. So that's where the challenge would be, is that how would it be edited on the same night? Because depending, like, nobody here is, this isn't a live document, or maybe it could be that the edits would be made. But then that's where, so how could you adopt it until you see that those changes are reflected? Right? Because to Councillor Bateman's point, thank you for catching those things. It's difficult to track from even the workshop into the edited to see that it all moved in. You know, you would have to sort of sit there at the time. But then if something was missed, I'm not saying maybe I wasn't speaking loud enough and it wasn't quite captured, whatever. It's 2 a.m. It's knowing whether or not that amendment has been made. So, but then it's adopted, it's done. Councillor St. Pierre?
Just clarification on that. So what happens to legal review on an amendment that we put together on the night of?
That's a good question. So what if we did do something that was Then what? If the legal review is already done and now we're making changes, how does that impact the referral and even legal review of this?
We'd have to take into consideration how substantial the amendment is. If it is something that appears to warrant a legal review, then if that is the thought that comes to mind of council, then it would be advised that we seek that legal review. Otherwise, if it's minor in nature, then it would likely not require a legal review.
It depends. Yeah. Mr. Schaefer?
And I think, pardon me, I think, your worship, if council made an amendment to the document at prior to third reading, the amendment would then be made in the final document because council directed us to do so. The council directs us to make changes to all sorts of documents and bylaws all the time, and trusts us to ensure that they are presented in the format that council has requested. And I think the same would apply here. While we can't do that on the fly because it's in a format that we can't access from our computers here, if council directed us to make an amendment to 7.12.1 and made a motion, then we would ensure that the final document would include that amendment. It's just the same as any other document. We wouldn't ignore it or file it or pretend it didn't happen. There's a record of it in the minutes and there's a record of it on the tape. And if council directs something be done, then it's going to be done.
Councillor McMath and Beddoes?
Just to follow up on Councillor St. Pierre's question, should something large enough warrant us to request a legal opinion? What is the timeline for the return?
It's going to depend on the scale of the item being reviewed. I mean, we could probably turn it around in a week if our legal counsel is available and has that time to do the review. Otherwise, it could span a few weeks, depending on how many items or what is the level of concern that warrants the legal review for them to then do the review itself and look at any case law and things of that nature. But typically, I have emailed our legal counsel and been able to get a response back within a day or two on simple items. So for such a substantial change to be considered requiring a legal review at this point, I'd be very curious to understand what that legal impact is that we're actually requiring review. I think we've gotten to a point now through the legal review. It's really making sure that everything meets the legislative requirements. Everything now at this point is now just policy pieces in the direction that we want to go. So, we'd really have to take a look, but I think within a week we could probably get a response.
Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, this is to staff. If, for instance, we go through second reading and get to the public hearing, and if we're unable to get to the public hearing because it's too large, we can just reject going to third reading. Is that correct?
I just want to confirm if we're not able to get through the entire public hearing in one night.
Well, we go to the second night and it's unsatisfactory. We hear too much stuff or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Then we just reject it and do not go to third reading. Is that correct?
Council is not required to proceed with third reading following the closing of the public
So
hearing.
we're in no danger if we go to a public hearing and everybody gets their say. And then council at that particular time decides not to go forward to it. And then it would go over to the next council.
If following the public hearing, once it's closed, this council does not proceed with third reading and does not proceed with any readings up until the point the new council is sworn in, it will become the new council's responsibility to see that bylaw through in whatever state.
So I mean, I'm hearing a lot of hypotheticals that this happens. We don't know. And the thing is, if we go to the democratic process of a public hearing, and that's when the public wades in on this, and that's when council listens. I mean, I hope we do anyways. And if it's unsatisfactory at that point, we just don't go to third reading. That's an option for us. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Everyone understand? Okay. So there's options for councils to consider here. The staff recommendation is that the amendments be approved as set out, as you see here, that the bylaw be given second reading as amended tonight. And that the public hearing be scheduled, and we have some dates set aside for that. Council could also just receive this for information, in which case, oh, sorry.
Sorry, I just wanted to point out if council does want to consider that other amendment to change the land use designation.
Right.
That would need to be considered prior to giving second reading. So after the first, before the second.
Well, we've already given it first reading.
Sorry, after the first motion that is on your screen.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But
And that's to
before
do with-
second reading is given, which is the second motion.
I see. Okay. So, okay. Thank you for that. The other options in the report here. Is that council outline other amendments, council not accept the item 3 would be that council not accept the proposed amendments and refer the draft back to staff to consider specific elements or take alternate actions as specifically directed. So council could receive for information, in which case the next council would pick this up. Questions or comments or something? Councillor Beddoes? Okay, I'll turn on your microphone, please.
Yeah, I guess I can't motivate before I make the motion, but I would like to go with the recommendation of our staff. The council approved the amendments to bylaw number 80, 2022 as set out in the attached bylaw 800, 2022 OCP August revisions. And then I don't know the wording for the one with the First Nations land.
We need to sever them all. So that would be the motion, would be that one, because then if that passes, that other one has to come back in.
I make that motion for the first one.
Right? Okay. Is that correct to our corporate officer? It would be just the first statement here. Okay, so that's moved by Councillor Beddoes and seconded by Councillor Bateman. Okay, so to motivate?
Yeah, I have not heard anything here about any revisions. I mean, we've been over this thing since April. We've taken in, we've got the consultants report, we've got staff support, we've got the committee's report. And so I think what we have is what we have. And I think that's what we don't, I didn't hear any revisions tonight. So I would like to proceed with it and see where see what comes out of it. I mean, the idea to me is the public will get an opportunity once again. Once we approve it this way, if it goes to the second one, if it goes to the public will have an opportunity to say what they need to say. And what I like about that is it won't just be some people here, it'd be all the community will have opportunity. And that will be how much they care. And that will be an opportunity. So I'd like to proceed with it and put it to the public. I think that's the democratic way. So that's my motivation for that first part.
Thank you, Councillor Beddoes. Councillor Bateman.
Okay. So I acknowledge at the outset tonight, I was rather shaken during our quasi-public hearing to hear former Mayor Colwood call it the worst OCP I have ever seen in Sooke, the worst planning I've ever seen. Then to hear Mrs. Lewis state that 180 letters were all opposing this OCP, as opposed to perhaps referencing the fact that they were opposing a particular fragment of a very complicated, rich, layered document that I'm a fan of. And as I've said before, I think it's close to finished. It's been and I'm encouraged by the words of the OCP Advisory Committee Chairperson, Mrs. Ritz, and the 5 other members of the OCP Advisory Committee that voted in favor of the first draft. Her comment was, and I'll just quote a little of it, in an email she sent to us July 19th that I read into the record that night. I'm writing to voice my support for council to give the draft OCP second reading and work to finalize this OCP before the October municipal election. The April 22nd, 2022 draft OCP is an accurate reflection of a specified and open OCP process created through 18 months of public engagement. It encouraged me also to hear the answer to Councillor Beddoes' question that we can have the public hearing and then we can stop it right there. We don't need to go to third reading and adoption in this very tight window. I think timing is everything here, and we are in election season. And I would think to make this OCP a central piece of the campaign discussion, it is exactly the mark of democracy in action. Every candidate for office will have the opportunity to read the OCP, understand its depths, maybe move beyond surface interpretation to look at the nature of a community planning document and speak out in that context. You know, I think it's important that if we as a council with 5 of us at least, I'm not sure about Councillor McMath yet, running for re-election, it would be incumbent on us to also state if indeed we don't want to move forward now, what indeed would we do if we retained our seats on council? Would we in fact want to see another round of community engagement? These are the kind of things we can talk about after the public hearing closes and before we go to third reading, if at all. So, oh, I love this. I've got like 10 minutes, don't I? I could just keep going.
You do. Can I just, you can. I would just interject though, that you close a public hearing, you cannot go and have a community open house on the matter because you've closed off community input.
If we did not go to third reading at that point, then it would be up to the new council to have their choices, would they not? They would.
Through your worship, if the public hearing has been closed, it's been closed. And you either proceed with third reading or you don't.
And if we don't proceed with third reading, it will be on an agenda for the new council to determine.
I mean, the public hearing could be reopened. But there really would not, in my opinion, maybe Mr. Bylaw disagrees that you couldn't have another open house per se. All of the public input you'd have to receive would have to be through a reopened public hearing.
Okay. But well, I'm not sure. I think I've said my piece. Thank you. Good night.
Okay. Councillor St. Pierre.
Thank you. I think we should move forward. It makes sense to move to a public hearing at a later stage after we finish all the amendments and approving these amendments. I'd like to just remind everyone that because we're in election season, it's going to be a good opportunity for anyone who wants to be on council to get many people informed about the OCP as possible. And I think that means that we'll get really good public engagement. It's going to be really lively, probably more so than most. And I think most of them are pretty lively in themselves. So I think this is actually a really good reason to move forward. We've had trouble because of all the reasons we know well, getting as much public engagement as possible. This is a perfect storm of engagement. Maybe not all the engagement we want to hear, and maybe it's going to be a little hard to take, but at the same time, we're sure going to get it. And I think this is a good chance to get it. Having said that, I think it's really important to remember the OCP is actually a visionary document. It informs policy. It's going to inform bylaws. It only becomes real once we have a strat plan that picks and chooses in it what's going to happen. Only once the strat plan goes to staff work plans and into budgets does it actually become a place where we spend money. And people have to keep that in mind. The public has to keep that. Everyone has to keep that in mind. So there's a lot of work beyond just the OCP. It's not the end all be all by any means. Many OCPs sit on a shelf gathering dust doing nothing ever. And that's actually been the case with many OCPs in Sooke. I believe staff, the community, and that's another important thing. This is a community document. It's not council's document. Otherwise, we wouldn't have gone through the fine-tooth comb at the last minute. We would have known what was in it all the way along. People have been astonished this council was not in all the way along, because that's not usually how it's done. However, We were told, stay out of it, don't make it about you. That's what we did. This is a community document. We're trying to fix it up. That's what's happening. I would also like to point out that delegated authority specifically, and many of the DPAs were in response to the development community's wish to have shortened wait times and to have much more clarity around a lot of confusion, where staff was getting to try and make choices as to what was going on. The DPAs provide way more clarity, way more detail. It's not up to staff anymore to say, well, yes or no. And there may be people who don't believe that, but that's actually what I think is happening here. And I think that's what we need. We need more clarity. Thank you very much.
Councillor McMath.
We're just starting to feel the first wave of tension and emotion, and it's going to be incredibly challenging at the public hearing. And the reality is we all have a very similar vision to what we would like Sooke to be, and that is to retain the qualities that make it special, but acknowledge that we're growing. I disagree with a few things that have been said. We are the conduit for the community. And we, in my opinion, made the wrong choice to stay out of it. By moving first motion, we excluded public. So what now is happening is we're going to have a wave of people who now are so exasperated and frustrated and have gotten mixed messages or heard one thing, told, don't worry, we've removed it, and then see it back up at another venue. These challenges, it's really going to come to a head at this public forum. Had we kept the public engaged, we could have offset a lot of these pieces that are going to come out in a really charged way. That is our function. How this works is that there is a community, here is council, here is the CAO, and here is the technical pieces to be implemented. It is not the other way around. And I keep hearing people mention that we want to have meaningful engagement, but I would relate it to some of the challenges with the climate action plan. I feel like we've done a disservice to that group because what we've said is go for it. Tell us everything that you would like to do. So they did. So they gave us this huge, beautiful, passionate, articulate list. And then now we're going to come to the till and say, hey, we can't afford any of it. And then you're going to see people who are incredibly upset, who have put a ton of their personal time that like none of us really have to give. And they're not going to see any of these things that they think that they are entitled to because we've approved it in principle come to fruition. And so the OCP, like the climate action plan, should not be a wish list where, you know, we make all these fantastical things like our previous current OCP out of 100-something action items, we did 10. That is so disappointing. It doesn't need to be that. It's not a high level wish list. It is a guiding plan. And so to have meaningful engagement and to have impact on your community, give them achievables, give them the reality of like the financial situation in Sooke. 93 grand in Sooke is about a 1% tax increase. There's not a lot of movement for that. When you throw everything into this book, trying to like check all these boxes that municipal politics has no business being a part of, and then you overstep in other areas, there's going to be disappointment, not just in one community, but the entire community, because they're going to look to this document and say, hey, you said you're going to do that. And we're going to come back and say, we can't afford it. That is not meaningful engagement. And so this process is challenging. It is our first term. It was an international pandemic, and I would give us all that grace. And it has been really hard for everyone. But I just don't think, I hear the comment, it's 98% perfect. If that were true, then there would be no qualms about passing it on to the next group to deal with. I have concerns about when the public consultation is finished, legally, are we allowed, or is the next group allowed to reopen that so that they can continue with those pieces? Because there seems to be a disagreement with staff on that. So I would like clarity on that first. But for the pieces that I've mentioned with the process alone, I don't support it.
Okay, let me try to get the clarity piece, and I'll go to Councillor Lajeunesse again on just your question there. If you don't mind restating it for staff, please.
I just want to confirm without a doubt, should we have our public hearings and we not come to a resolution, that public hearing can be reopened for a future council?
Yeah, a public hearing can be reopened and it will be the council of the day. It's not
Yeah.
going to matter whether it's this council or the next. A public hearing can be reopened.
Thank you.
Councillor Lajeunesse, then Loggins, please.
Yeah, so I don't know. I have many concerns still with moving this document forward, and I think there are still some fundamental flaws with the documents, some big ones, actually. And one, would it be possible to pull up the map of the land use designations on the screen? The main, one of the biggest issues that I see is that the, what is it, community residential designation, which covers about 1,600 acres west of the river, allows for 70 units per hectare, or that's 28 units per acre. So that means a minimum lot size would be approximately 1,500 square feet. And the square root of 1,500 is 39. So that means you're looking at lot sizes of 39 by 39 feet. If you look at that area in the yellow zone there, that covers that entire area. And so that's going to mean there won't be a tree left west of the river. And you'll have at 28 units per acre, 70 per hectare, that works out to about 48,000 single family dwellings in that area. Which exceeds, I think, anyone's expectations. And I guess if there was an upside to that, it would be that there would be a lot of affordable housing because no one would want to live here. Also, the fact that I don't believe that there's been adequate community engagement during the initial fact gathering period, because it was done during a pandemic. We were all in lockdown and the people did not have adequate input into the initial document or into the initial vision. And I just think moving forward with it at this time with these fundamental flaws would be a huge mistake. And so I'm not prepared to move this forward.
Thank you, Councillor Loggins.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm in support of the motion that Councillor Beddoes made. The OCP is a visionary document. It can't be compared to an action plan like the climate action plan. This is an overarching vision for the community, and I think it hits the nail on the head as a vision for the community. And action items will be budgeted out with a strategic plan by councils in the future. I look forward to seeing what they do with it. And I hope that we move this forward to the public hearing because I would love to hear what the public has to say. I know we've heard a bit through this process in recent months, without any community input at the council chambers. So it'd be good to have folks in the room who are able to attend and may not have been able to speak to us yet.
Okay, thank you. For myself, I'm worried about this. The wave of concern that Councillor McMath said she feels coming, I've been feeling it since last year. I raised concerns about the day-to-day operations of our community. It's extremely busy. There's a lot of interest, and we have the same labor and supply challenges that everyone else has. Since then, I've raised this at council before in December, last fall, in the spring, just about, like, I'm drowning in dealing with the customer service element. It's come into my realm and it really doesn't belong to me. So we're all doing our part to pull things together. So there's that piece. I heard that if we progress to the public hearing, it may impact our day-to-day operations. Day-to-day operations is what keeps the lights on and the pipes running within our community. And right now, that is really what we need to focus on. We are in a time of hyperinflation, escalating costs, and it's still a struggle for people. Everything is difficult. Getting the windshield repaired in a car is difficult. Getting your car serviced, calling Visa, all of these things are just clunky and difficult right now. So I worry about the service delivery. This is what gives us the revenue to do the things that we need to do, to meet what we must need to have and to do what we would like to have. There's significant cost pressures coming our way. Some of the few are just the RCMP itself. Surrey successful with a pullout. That rebalance will hit all local governments that are still in the RCMP services, which is Sooke. Costs of major crime investigations, all of those pieces, and there's shortages there too. These are immediate cost pressures. The downloading of body-worn cameras and software, these are good initiatives. It'll be our expense. The e-com download is coming our way. We have 2 years, but it's still coming to us, and we've crossed over 15,000. So we are going to pay more. That's one piece on this whole item here. Yes, in terms of engagement with the community, this is a good time. However, there's more to Sooke than just the OCP. Anyone running, you should be talking. Do you feel safe? All of the things around protective services, your vision for the future. Are your children getting into the programs? These are all things. Not all of it falls into the local government realm, but that's what you start to hear in a campaign, are all of these things. In terms of engagement, yes, there was great engagement in the pandemic. I think in terms of what we accomplished or what the committees of council with staff and then consultant, that was great. Engagement from a virtual perspective for those who were able to participate. And I can't stress that enough, because people that were dealing and just trying to survive could not participate. Imagine families fighting over broadband width in their homes while they're homeschooling their children because they're not going to school, trying to help other families that are dealing with COVID or sick from COVID. That is what they were doing. They were just trying to survive in an environment that was changing constantly. So those that could did, and I'm grateful for everything that they contributed. In terms of school, yes, I am a parent. I have a child that goes to school. There was one newsletter and it did cite that the district is doing this, and you can go online and do that. When I talk to parents, they're like, what? They're just trying to get their kid into swim lessons rather than this document. Okay, I don't quite know what you're talking about. It's on my list of things to look at eventually once we get the clothes and what we need to do to survive in our home. And will that day come for them? Probably not, because they're still dealing with it now. So we move forward and we heard, stay out of this. Council will come when the committee's work is done. And then it was that conversation about, well, how does it move between one and another? Well, we had to move first reading. So I agreed to move first reading to get it out of the committee's hands and into council's realm. So, okay, now we're here and we can start to talk about this, but then procedurally, the public is locked out of that process. So there was one committee of the whole, which we had a lot of information on and a lot of feedback, and we dealt with the 3 areas that were raised at that time. Well, as words started to filter out, there were other pieces that came through around this, that, or the rest. And then another group came in and we could not hear from them because our procedure has locked them out. That's our fault. That's our procedure. It's good practice in many places. Fine. It is what it is. So we have an open house, and I went to that open house. It was crowded and congested and very, very busy. It was very difficult to hear what was going on because a lot of folks were very concerned, not wanting to go. And COVID is still a thing. People are still getting very sick from this disease. So there was hesitancy to enter into that room. Some did, some didn't. I kind of looked at it and do I want to walk in there or not? I did. Didn't get sick, thank you, but I couldn't hear because of the din in the room. When I hear people speaking, it's very hard for me to focus on the conversation. How am I capturing this? And I have other pieces that were captured. Okay, so then it takes us forward to how do we take all of this away? Where's the summary? What did people say there? Okay, so then we start to do this line by line review, and we know how tedious it was. And this was my frustration with the consultant there. Why are you giving us something riddled with typos and mistakes? This should have been edited and fixed before it even came to us, but fine. Now we're dealing with that. I'm grateful for Councillor Bateman in catching those because you don't want them to keep prevailing onwards. So in terms of engagement, in terms of who could participate, yes. The bigger piece for me and what is still missing is consultation. Consultation with stakeholders, consultation with developers, consultation with the government, consultation with schools, all of this. Okay, we are thinking about this. What do you think? We need that two-way exchange when so many from the development community are raising flags, you know, from all over the place, the Builders Association, you know, whether it's West Coast Design or others that represent others, Mr. Saunders or others that are bringing this forward. It's a very one way. They say this, but there's not a, okay, well, can we talk about this together? Maybe you're saying the same thing. Maybe it's the language, or maybe when you say this isn't possible to achieve, and by this, I mean the developer is saying, okay, we can't do that. Okay, tell me more about that. Why can it not be done? And then I can have staff say, okay, well, here's what we're accomplishing in this area. Okay, I get it. Well, how can we work together? What would work here? How can we shift this to make it work? The community wants to see this. How can we achieve this? I get it. We need to build this community together. It's not just staff and council giving out, here, this is what you can build and that only. There's creative input and there's success stories from our community of beautiful design and work where people are getting awards from this and it's celebrated. So how can we foster that creativity and build something where we're allowing that entrepreneurial creativity to really grow and flourish? We have to do this together. If they say it's impossible, I need to understand why. I still don't know why it isn't. And so then I'm looking at the feedback. Okay, can I call up this person? I can't because I don't even know who wrote it. So it's stuck, but it's that consultation piece. What would I see different? It would be the case of, okay, we're reopening now. We were stuck. We were limited in April in terms of what venue we could actually use. So we need to do, how do we break this up? They always say when you're doing big policy documents, consult early, consult often, consult early, consult often, often. Now, if it's the case of someone is just being disagreeable and okay, fine, we can't keep you happy. You can't just do that. Nobody wants that anymore. But the world is changing and we have to take that into consideration. So that piece is still missing from me. The consultation piece is not here. Going to a formal public hearing where we then hear about it, how am I to sit there and take that and then they're going to read this out, you know, okay, Mayor Tate, you have problems with this. This is how it's going to be achieved. I still don't see how I can have staff come back and say, okay, that doesn't work in this case because of this. And then what does the community think about it? The process is too formal. That's why even pre-COVID, Minister Robinson at the time wanted to revamp the whole public hearing process because the province identified it at that time as a fail. It's a 50-year-old system that no longer works today. Going forward, whatever meetings we have, it completely eliminates families. Right now, children are going to bed. Parents are tired. They're trying to get their kids to sleep. School just started. At the end of September, it's going to be the same thing. It's about getting your kid to soccer or to hockey or whatever, and then making sure they've done some homework, that they're fed and they're to bed. They're not in this. The commuting, the families, they're not in this document because they have been so busy trying to survive, but they put their trust in us. To, you know, during the pandemic, I hated it when the public wasn't here. You know, we had to wait for the ministerial order, the provinces set up rules. I didn't like that the public was locked out. It felt weird. It still feels weird to me. Glad to see some of you here. But the case was, it was to allow us to do with the business that needed to be done. We operate EOCs. We're dealing with other business to keep the lights on. And I feel the public put our trust in us to be like, okay, thank you for doing that. We can't participate. The time will come when you can. So now is not the time. I feel they've been blindsided. with this document. While they were surviving, we're pushing this through. I know it was a priority of this council. I know that our current OCP has issues. I know our zoning bylaw has issues, but now is not the time when people are really struggling in our community. The slowdown in building permits is hurting our families. These are people that just need to go to work and need certainty around what they're doing. They need to be able to pay for that bill or the hockey enrollment or whatever. Their mortgage, it just went up yesterday again for anyone with a variable rate or any kind of debt out there. And there's a lot of people that are in that position that are even trying to find ways to find money to repay the CERB payment they got a few years ago. It is a tough time for families, and it is continuing to be. I strongly recommend that council not pass this. Let's put the matter on hold. If I am fortunate to be reelected, I will make a commitment that we will reopen this once the new council has good orientation. At this time, we'll also hopefully have updated census data, and we will know what the province intention is around housing and density. There's been a lot of foreshadowing coming from Minister Eby on this. What does he mean? What is he going to be doing? What is the appeal? If we shut something down or this doesn't, is the province then going to be the appeal board to get the housing in? Because they recognize there's a housing crisis and people are living in vans trying to survive. This is not the time to put forward a significant policy document. Other comments from councillors? Councillor St. Pierre.
Just something very quick. I can see a lot of truth in everything that's been said at the table. I would suggest that whatever this council does, it should probably pass the first recommendation from staff, which is to tie everything up with a bow in terms of the work this council has done in terms of amendments. If we're going to basically put everything off on the next council, which certainly a possibility, I'd rather that be taken care of, and then we can just not go to second reading and not go to anything else.
Okay, Councillor Beddoes.
Yeah, I kind of disagree with, I don't disagree with everything you said. It went on for quite some time, but I want to hear from the public. And that's the whole idea of a public hearing. And to say that council wasn't involved, we have been involved in this document for months in great detail. The public was engaged. There was ample opportunity. And some of the people that say that, oh, it was rushed and it wasn't engaged, have said to me, oh, I basically couldn't be bothered that time. There will be no good time for the public when you're raising a young family. Because whether it was COVID or trying to put food on the table, it's always going to be difficult when you engage with the public. But that's our job. And once we get the facts from the public at a hearing, that's what we are to do. That is exactly what we are here to do. We're here to listen to people. Some people think that we don't listen. But when we had the 30-meter setback to 15, we listened. I was the one who made the motion to set it back, and to people, then the rest of council wanted more information. So it's not as though we're not listening. Council has been involved in this in depth. And I hear councillors all of a sudden say, oh, I have objections now. I didn't hear those objections when we're sitting around the table. When they said the DPAs were all full of shit and they didn't want to do it. You know how long we spent as a council on DPAs? An hour and a half. And not one change was made to those DPAs. And then to turn around and say, oh, now we have second thoughts. There are some people that are dead set against this. They say it's a pile of crap. There's a lot of people who put a lot of hours into this that have made submissions to us, to the committee, to council, articulate things. And then we just say, oh, it doesn't matter to you because these other people are making a lot of noise. Let them make noise. That's your opportunity to make noise at a public hearing. This is the document that we have. This is what we went to the community to get. This is what we spent $200,000 and some on. And council, maybe late, did become engaged in that and did go over it. Is it a perfect document when it comes to A's, ands, and thus? No, I was embarrassed by some of that. But that's just a lesson that when we go to a consultant, we maybe do a little bit better job. But I don't see that the public was not consulted. The public has been consulted. And I don't see this council not listening to people when they have these concerns. Every concern that I saw brought to us and to staff was addressed. Now, people still unhappy with it. Let's hear it at a public hearing. That's what it's for. That's what we're here for. So, I mean, this other thing, you just throwing it off to the next council. I'm sorry, it sounds like politicking to me. You know, we said we we're going to do something. And we gathered the information. We did the best job we could under the circumstances. And then you just say throw it all out because it was no good. And that's basically what people are saying, or you saying around this table. What a crock. We have consulted. We have done our due diligence. We have worked on it. We're not geniuses on this stuff. We're lay people like anybody else. I'm not a planner. I rely on planning to do it. We relied on planning, the consultant, and the committee to engage with the people. And the committee felt that they did it. And I was on that committee and I felt that we did. But I also believe that in my job as counselor is to listen to people. And I'm always willing to listen to people. I have changed my mind many times on these matters. So let's get on with it. Let's get it in the public's hands. If it goes south, what have we done? We've engaged the public and they've let us know that they're unhappy with it. Then we stop the process and start it up again next year. What's wrong with that? It sounds to me like that's exactly how democracy should work. So I'm just flabbergasted at some of these things and these, you know, pie family stuff. I mean, families always have difficult time engaging. It is difficult to raise kids. I've raised my kids, my daughters and sons are raising kids now. I know it's difficult, but this is the process. This is why we're here, to take this information in and sort through it and do what's right for the community, not for a select group of people that may have voted for you, but the whole community. And that's what our job here is to do, is consider everybody. I didn't like some of the things that some of the climate people said. I didn't agree with them, but they had every right to say them and every right to put them into that document if they can get them in there. Just like the other groups have every right to push their concerns. It's our job to sort through that and put a document out that reflects the best of everybody, not one group, everybody. And we throw this out and we start doing this a year from now, you're going to have all the same groups that have made these very good arguments come back and say, oh, things have changed now. Let's start the whole process again. So let's take another $200,000 or another 2% on your taxes to pay for another study. I mean, how many times do you have to do this? So I'm a little bit frustrated with it. I am willing to listen to people. I am willing to make changes, but let's go to the public. The public hearing is the place to go. Sorry, we've consulted enough and we're going to keep consulting and consulting and never make anybody happy.
Thank you.
Done.
Councillor McMahon.
I know you chaired that committee and I can feel your passion in your speech. I do want us to not make it personal because we each have our own perspective and it is valid. The problem with where we are now is none of us want to throw the OCP out. None of us are looking to spend another 200 grand. That's not what's being discussed right now. It's putting a pin in a plan that is having unintended consequences now, currently, and will have in the future. By us pushing this through at the rate that we're trying to push it through, people who are trying to obtain mortgages, who are trying to get permits, they are being put on the back burner. They were already being put on the back burner because we're short-staffed. And now for us to push this document through, they're getting pushed again. And so like the irony is not lost here. And that's not our function. The other thing is going back to the pieces, well, we can amend things later once we pass it, which is a comment I'm hearing a lot. Who's paying for that? That's your community member. That's not 10 grand spent out of the district for further consultation and engagement. That is like $5,000 to a single mother who can't afford it. That is a deal breaker for them to get into a home or acquire a permit. Like there's all these pieces that are attached that we're not seeing, that we're going to feel at this meeting. If it is as great as it is, the next group will have no problem making amendments and moving on. The piece, which I totally agree with, that the mayor touched on, was that it's been a one-sided conversation because of how we followed a certain procedure. What that's done is that's limited us to find solutions because, as Councillor Beto said, we don't have degrees in development. That's not our specialty. We're not a staff member. We're community representatives looking to get educated on these pieces. And what your development community is saying to you, and everyone's voice matters, this group in particular actually comprehends what the implementation of these choices mean. So when I go to a community engagement thing and I look at really pretty pictures with very simple words, of course I'm like, yeah, that sounds amazing. This sounds great. If I know the actual implications, I may not choose that, but I need to be educated to make that choice. So to say because, well, there was green dots here and red dots here, that's not a fair assessment because there was no financial implication. And there is a serious lack of comprehension. So when the group of your community who lives here, who works here, whose family's here, when they come to us and they are saying there are serious issues here, it's not a versus. It needs to have that connection and that collaboration because we're all trying to get to the same space. The push, I don't understand the reason for it. And I wish we would stop talking about it as a political piece because that should not be a piece in your mind when you are working on this document and you're pushing your perspective as a community representative. That should be the last thing on your mind for everyone. So what our job is here is to think of the 15,000 people who aren't here, who will be impacted. And have we done our full due diligence? I don't think we have. It's a pause. It's not a stop. It's not a chuck in the basket. It's a pause. One of our components is a mental health aspect. This is causing stress for everyone. And so I don't know where the fear of pressing pause is coming from.
Councillor Bateman, then Lajeunesse.
Yeah. So I'm feeling stressed. Thank you all for this. You know, I respect all of you and both you, Mayor Tate and Councillor Beddoes and Councillor McMath just now have made a lot of good points. I'm very much, I'm usually teetering on the fence with most of my decisions and I'm always eager to understand and learn more. You know, OCPs traditionally throughout Canada, as I understand it, don't get a lot of community input. You know, it's unfortunate. It's a complicated, big document, and people generally don't show up when they have the opportunities. COVID has changed that in this case, and as much as we had a very high per capita engagement, the lack of in-person body sport, contact sport is what it can be at times, and that's what I anticipate this public hearing would be. I'm concerned, you know, after 4 years, I'm still a little hazy on the procedures. So if indeed at the end of that public hearing, we're in some sort of we've now closed the door on any future public input into this document, that would be disturbing. I find one thing I'm curious to hear again from the mayor, your thoughts on how we would deal with this, because I intend to get reelected, frankly. I'd like to, and I'd like to be at this table, taking my considerable knowledge about this document and council procedures and process and all these plans and reports that we have in shaping the community, knowing that, as Councillor Logan said, this is a big vision piece and circumstances will dictate how it moves forward. You know, a 7.5% inflation rate this last month on operational costs. It means that a lot of the big, beautiful ideas in these documents, which are balanced out by a lot of really practical ongoing actions, we'll need to move forward at variable pace. So I am interested in knowing how we would deal with this OCP if it remains at first reading stage, if indeed we're reelected. And so I'd like to ask you a question, Mayor Tate, to reiterate what you'd said earlier.
Okay, I don't recall exactly what I said. I do say that my emotions flared up. I lost that a little bit. Care about the community. Anyway, an example I'm going to use is, and I think I can talk about this, is the Lions proposal in John Phillips Memorial. And I sort of glanced this way. We went through a process. We went through an AAP. We could have proceeded. We decided, no, we're not going to proceed because everything is closed. We need to wait for everything to reopen so we can have a good face-to-face chat about what is actually intended and have the relevant stakeholders on the ground. And then it's not happening until the end of September, I believe, because that would be the earliest time for that to happen. So it can be done, and that is on a very important piece to members of our community. Stakeholders will be present. There's someone there to assist with that piece. Everyone's invited to attend and to get clarity around what that intention is. So something similar like that in a larger venue that is accessible to the public. Maybe it's the MCS atrium area. Perhaps it's the community hall, though accessibility and parking are a challenge there. EMCS may be a better fit. And then maybe it's a series of, okay, let's invite, various, okay, these people all had concerns from the development world. Let's come on in, invite the UDI in and say, okay, let's talk about this. Let's hear from you. Maybe it's workshop tables, that sort of thing, where you can understand that. And then it'll become a bit more clear. Why is this not going to work? Why does it have success in places like Squamish or otherwise, where these examples came from? What are we trying to accomplish with this? And perhaps, is it just the language? Sometimes it seems that I hear, developer A say something, a staff person say something in different words, but essentially you're saying the same thing, but there seems to be disagreement, but I actually think you're on the same page here. So what is the shift in language that we need to do to provide clarity under that?
Okay, thank
It's
you
an
for that
example.
answer.
The
Yeah.
FCM has some good material on how councils can workshop through policy areas with all sorts of scale up, scale down sort of pieces. In regards to families, in the last OCP, the students actually participated quite vigorously at their schools and gave and were able to participate. This will impact those children of today into the future.
So I'll just finish my comment, and that relates to the fact that we have invested $200,000 and immense amounts of time in creating a really substantial document here. So I would trust that when these processes renew, this document would in fact be the central piece of it, and that it would be the reference. If you're going to do a session on the development permit guidelines, then these recommended development permit guidelines must be the central focus for revision and refinement. Otherwise, we're going to just carry, the district needs a new OCP, and I would hope that it could get done within the next 6 months. So you don't want to just go back to scratch and start over, which is just nuts.
No, it's not about starting over. The other piece to clarify there is when there was some engagement with the Sooke, but they've still been closed. As things reopen, there will be an opportunity to actually meet with the membership and to talk more fulsome about what is actually being discussed here. In addition to the notes I wrote down, we have a whole series of workshops next week on wastewater for Kaltassin and Whiffen Spit. These are significant capital discussions that'll be happening there. What does that feedback look like, and how does that play out into this? What if everyone in Whiffen Spit wants wastewater and wants more density? Does that not change the character of this? That isn't what we heard early on, though, but because that conversation is yet to come to be. There was some outreach that went out, but we as a council have not received any of that public piece unless we've sort of followed it. No report on that has come before council yet from the mailers that were done last year. It's not happening until next week. Unfortunately, we aren't going to be here to be in the room to understand it, but I'm just saying that conversation is happening. How does that play into this? Then what needs to change into this? We don't know yet because it hasn't happened. There will be announcements from ministers next week at UBCM. What does that actually mean into all of this? So it's taking those various pieces there and making that and having that happen. As well as the current census data. Councillor Logan's, I believe, then La Jeunesse.
First, I just have a question. Are we doing the entire, all three? We're just doing approve the amendments.
We're still on the first one.
Okay, it seems to me we're talking about the second one, which hasn't even been moved yet. I'd like to stick to the first one, which is approve the amendments that we've already discussed. And make sure that they're up to snuff for what we wanted to be in there. That's the motion on the table. At the same time, it baffles me how many times we have to say this and we take turns saying around the table. But the OCP is a long-term guiding document. So when you say, Mayor Tate, things like we don't know yet because it hasn't happened, the OCP is meant to be in place for us for potentially 20 years. There's a lot we don't know that hasn't happened. So in terms of like the wastewater, that's why we have the wastewater plan, the master plan. That's why we have all these master plans, because things will change over time and we'll change our policies and we'll change our master plans and create new ones along the way. The OCP will continue with time to get more and more outdated. And that's just the way it works. It's not going to be a perfect document ever, and it's going to get less perfect with time. But we do have to have a vision for the future, which is what I think this OCP captures. But back to the motion, I think that we should approve the amendments as set out in the August revisions.
Thank you, Councillor La Jeunesse.
Yeah, just on that, I would agree that we can approve the August revisions, but I think we need to have some more discussion about the second motion on the table here.
Okay, let's go.
Well,
We'll stick to what's on the floor, and that was me. I kind of got caught up in the second reading piece, so we'll stick back. But no one called a point of order, so I just kept going. I know, but even you didn't say anything. Okay, so thanks for reining me in there. Okay, so I'll draw your attention to what's on the floor, and that is the amendments. All those in favor of the amendments? Anyone opposed? That's unanimous. Okay, so now there's the other motion here.
Bathroom break.
Oh, sure, okay. Okay, so we'll recess for 10 minutes. So it's currently 7:32, so I'll see you at 7:42. And we're back. It's 7:42. Thank you everyone for that time. Okay, so the other piece though that I was looking for here was the was there not that other motion that we would need to consider? Okay, so this one here, and this is the one related to Shianu, okay? Is that council amends Sooke official community plan bylaw number 800 2022 figure 7 OCP land use designation for lot 1, section 121, Sooke district plan EPP 22373 from rural residential to comprehensive development. Would someone like to move that? Okay, moved by Councillor Beddoes and seconded by Councillor St. Pierre. Any comments or questions, Councillor Beddoes?
No, it seems pretty straightforward and you know, we're told to work with the First Nation, and I guess this is that. So yeah, I'm okay with it.
Councillor St. Pierre? Okay. Councillor Logan?
Yeah, I just have a question through you to staff, if they can go through the stages of this process again, just to get that refreshed in my mind, please.
Mr. Paolo?
So as part of the initial engagement processes, probably around late last year, we provided drafts to multiple agencies, Shianu being one of those groups. And they had appointed an agent on their behalf to make comments on the official community plan. Following my conversations with that agent, we were of the understanding that no changes were going to be required, that future planning would be undertaken at a later date. And at that time, we would visit the idea of a comprehensive development designation and any other associated planning required to support that development. Upon my return today, and as well with the representative from Shianu, I had a discussion probably about an hour and a half before this meeting, just discussing the specifics regarding their proposal and to gain a little bit more detail. And through that conversation, I gained additional insight as to that process that they undertook to acquire those lands, what their future interests would be, and a willingness to work collaboratively with the district on future land use planning for this area. So my comment back to the CAO there was that I would bring forward this motion for consideration by district council for that inclusion. And then through that process, if it were to be successfully redesignated to comprehensive development, then we would then work on future protocols for developing that parcel of land in the future, obviously servicing and other land use considerations, but to at least recognize that interest and that this would be the first step in many moving forward for them to envision future development of those lands. Obviously, the Capital Regional District will need to be part of that depending on the intensity of development on that parcel, but at least from a local government perspective, we're indicating that we'll work and support with them.
Thank you, Mr. Paolo. An additional question would be that this is very similar to lands identified by the South. They're all marked as CD as well. Is that?
That is correct. The purpose for this originally not being indicated as comprehensive development is that, as you know, from previous conversations through the MOU and other conversations with Sooke, we've identified specific cultural significant lands making up those comprehensive development pieces. That has not been specifically identified for this parcel, but understanding the interests of the First Nation for this parcel, we're willing to work with them to go through a future analysis of these lands.
Okay, no, that's great. I'm glad that dialogue is occurring. Councillor McMath?
Through your worship to staff, what are their plans?
What was explained to me from their agent last year was that initially they would be looking at some residential development on those properties to provide additional housing. Servicing was a question that I had, and that would have to be developed through additional land use strategies developed for that parcel, but housing was what was indicated as the land use.
Just for my own clarity, they're looking to build just residential homes?
That's what was initially indicated, yeah.
And so they can't do that now.
Likely for the density that they would be seeking, a residential density would not achieve a great number of housing units for them. So a comprehensive development would allow for that flexibility for the applicant to come forward and say, based on this density that we're proposing and this servicing that can support it and all other policy compliance, this can be achieved. But otherwise, those lands in that area are all rural residential because they're outside the community growth area, which has been established by the CRD's regional growth strategy.
How much density are they looking for?
Hundreds of units. I don't know specifically because they haven't put
It's so
together a
last
full,
minute. Yeah.
a full plan, yeah.
Just with that, I'd rather receive for info, not like discard it. But I don't necessarily want to just in our green light it necessarily. What are some examples of other CD zones in Sooke?
Silver Space Sooke Point, that's a comprehensive development zone.
Sun River.
Sun River is, do we have the map from my presentation? I can bring them up so visually you can see specifically the locations. So those ones that are purple, so Grouse Nest, Goodridge Peninsula, the lands back of the castle, motel and liquor, Sooke Point, as I mentioned. Leave those are the ones. So you had mentioned Sun River, that's a comprehensive development zone. So it has comprehensive development zoning, but not a comprehensive development land use designation within the OCP. It's currently community residential.
My monitor is funky. Does this section, yours as well? Okay. Does this section back on to Grouse Nest?
Grouse Nest would be across. So it's just off of Nagle Road. So when you go down Gillespie and then you head east on Nagle Road, then that provides access to this parcel.
Okay.
In the vicinity of
Gotcha.
Grouse Nest, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Beddoes, then St. Pierre.
This is for staff, so if we allow this comprehensive, it doesn't lock them into any zoning, does it, for density? That would have to be worked out with staff and them, which would be us. Is that correct, or?
Correct. Both district and the First Nations would work together on a plan for the necessary area planning for this, and then the associated zoning with its specific regulations. So they would come in with a comprehensive development zone application with the specific uses, setbacks, and other zoning regulations that you see in other zones.
Sure, so I mean, if the council of the day finds out that they don't like the density and it changes the landscape too much, they can just reject it, is that correct?
There would be multiple bylaw public processes for council and the public to consider their application.
Thank you.
Councillor St. Pierre.
That's more or less my question.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bateman, then
I
Lajeunesse.
just wanted clarity on the size of this lot and also if you have a timeline that they're anticipating.
I believe it's about 160 acres and I don't have a timeline specifically. Just obviously through our OCP review process, they wanted to identify this as a potential opportunity to begin that planning process. And then with many of their developments, it will be dependent on the need and the servicing aspect.
Councillor Lajeunesse.
Yeah, I'm just curious as to whether they are prepared to supply water to that area, because there won't be enough water for hundreds of homes, I don't think, in that neighborhood.
So that would be another piece as part of the servicing for these lands, as well as the ongoing work of the Capital Regional District and, being the purveyor of water, and the work that they're looking through in East Sooke and the rest of the JDF area. This would potentially, as part of study areas, be one of those locations where a water line would could potentially go down Gillespie Road. So then the conversation would have to involve this development and their future density and servicing requirements, and how does that all work with the CRD? Alternatively, it'd be some form of private on-site.
Okay. So that's been moved and seconded. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Counselor McMath is opposed. The motion carries. Okay, so that brings us to the second piece here, and that, or third item, I guess, of two, that council gives second reading to the official community plan bylaw number 800/2022. Counselor Beddoes is moving that. Do I have a seconder by Counselor Logans? Thank you. To speak to it, Counselor Beddoes.
Yeah, I think it's the next step, and I don't want to go into the great big long conversations we had, but basically I would like to go to second reading and hear back from the public. So that'll be dealt with on the third one. Again, I believe strongly that we need to hear from people, and it's another opportunity, whether it comes to full fruition of the OCP, that's up in the air, and I understand that, but I like to keep going. I like second reading.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Logans. Good. Okay. Other members, Counselor St. Pierre.
Just like to make a few comments about questions that have come up and then something more specific. So in terms of Councilor Jeunesse was curious about the density. I believe that it was in the document as a very high density so that we would not have to amend the OCP if someone, for example, wanted to put an apartment building with high density. So that allows basically applicants not to have to amend the OCP every time they want to have that kind of density. That area should be supporting that kind of density in locations, but it wouldn't be everywhere. And I think that that's the intent of the FAR or of those densities. In terms of the DPAs, I certainly hope the DPAs, when they go into implementation stage, will go before the Land Use Development Committee, which should have representatives of the development community and must have represent the development community. I don't think that this should be turned into bylaw and be actually implemented until that happens. And so I think there'll be additional opportunities for that to happen. And I do believe that our staff also has a grant for actually improving our development permit process. And I'm sure that's going to inform this as well. So I think that all of this is coming together to actually hopefully assist the development community and actually moving forward more quickly, more certainty. And I'm just going to wrap this up on that last word, certainty. I really appreciate what everybody's been saying. I've rarely had so much respect for people's opinions because you managed to change my mind about 3 or 4 times, and that does not happen regularly. Thanks. Thank you, Councilor McMath, Beddoes, everybody else. Wow. But that tells me something. That tells me that this is actually 6 of one, half another in some ways, and we have to come down on one side. Stress was mentioned. I completely agree. There's too much stress and everybody's feeling it. We're actually moving from one crisis to another, and the community is moving from a crisis to another all the time. I mean, you've got housing crisis, you've got people on the streets, you've got people losing their jobs, you've got inflation, you've got pandemics, you've got God only knows what else happening. The thing that we can provide as council is leadership and certainty, and waffling back and forth on a document that we put so much time into and that the community has put time into, and that most of us largely agree with entirely. I mean, there might be some little elements where we're not too sure, but those can actually be fixed. And I think this is a time when those families need that kind of certainty. Sometimes the worst decision is no decision, and I happen to think this may be the case here. I think we need to provide the community with certainty, because otherwise this continues being a stressful thing. It'll just keep on going. And the community doesn't need that, and we don't need that. So I suggest that we move on to second and then move on to a public hearing. And it's going to be hard, but I think that's what we should be doing.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Lajeunesse.
Yeah, I just don't feel that a public hearing is the right vehicle for the trip that we want to take right now. I think what would be better is a more informal process where we have more of an open house type of discussion, like what Mayor Tate was alluding to earlier. I just think that I I was involved with the previous OCP process. And the,
Aren't we dealing with the motion to plan go to second reading? Not, we still have to talk about public hearing.
Yes, I think
Correct?
we are on second reading, but I do feel that Councillor Lajeunesse is trying to frame his reasoning for second reading.
yeah, I just feel that prior to second reading, we should have more community consultation in an informal setting to allow people, to allow some back and forth conversation with people. When in the last OCP, which I was a part of, the consultants essentially moved to Sooke for about 18 months, and they spent numerous hours and days and weekends and nights consulting with people in all sorts of venues. And I have not seen any evidence that that happened this time. And I think overall, the vision that is contained within the document is good. But I think there's a lot of the more technical aspects that need a closer look. And I feel that prior to second reading, we need that informal communication with people, because I don't feel that that has happened in this case. So I'm not going to support second reading.
Okay, thank you. Other councillors? Councillor Bateman?
Yeah. So I think I'm the swing vote here, and that's a very awkward position to be in. I think as Councillor St. Pierre said, you know, back and forth, and each of you are making such good points. My dad was a colonel in the military, and he also had that logic of you got to make a decision, and then you work with the consequences of it. So I think I will vote in favor of moving us to second reading.
Okay, Councillor McMath?
So we did make a decision, and that was to proceed with first reading, and the consequences of that are now we have excluded public consultation in a way where it can be captured meaningfully, where we can work on these pieces, these technical aspects, where you have one party saying, this is how we're going to solve this issue, and you have a party that uses those policies and those bylaws. And they're saying, we want the same thing, but the tools that you have created are counterintuitive to the purpose that you're trying to drive to. And so the consequences of our choice are now that these groups, these parties, are not able to exchange these ideas to get us on the path to the same place. So I'm not approving the second reading because I don't agree with the OCP where it's at. I do want the public hearing. I do want that engagement. I do want those roundhouse discussions where we sit down and hash it out, because we're trying to go to the same place. So to be crystal clear, I do want that. I do want that consultation. I do want that engagement, but I don't support the plan where it is. So I also don't understand why we're trying to ram it through, especially when it is being detrimental to the community members whose plans and lives and projects are being put on hold because of an error that we made. And so that consequence that we have created, it is actually those community members that are paying for it. And it isn't going to be an exorbitant amount of money to make amendments and to have those sit down discussions. It's just a pause. And the stress that we won't see, but they will feel so strongly, like fiscally, mentally, emotionally, we won't hear that. Like a lot of these people don't have time to come talk to us. They're just going to show up and be like, hey, I would like to do this. Like, can't do that anymore. Like, sorry, we have to push this through. Those are some ripples that are really going to hurt people. And I think it's sometimes hard to remember that when you're sitting here and you're not out there. So I want the public engagement. I want the consultation. I want the public hearing. I don't want the plan to go forward as it is. That is the unfortunate crossroads of where we're at right now. And that's that stuck feeling that we have.
Councillor Logans?
I would argue that the same is true on the flip side. We're stuck with slowed down, our office is slowed down by our current OCP. And our staff are stuck figuring out the nuances of that. This one makes more sense when we've had every other OCP meeting and we brought forward the questions of the public. And I think we did a good job of bringing those questions forward and making sure we asked every single one. We had discussions with staff who clarified each of those pieces and it made sense. And that's why we didn't change any of the DPAs. That's why we made the decision to carry forward. So I think that there's just miscommunication going forward. I don't think that delaying second reading is a reason to fix miscommunications that are happening. I think that's something that can play out more that can play out better in real time. As we implement the OCP, people will see how it is helping them improve their development process and their lives in the community. I don't think delaying this and discussing it further at more open houses is going to help communicate it. I think actioning this document is the best way to help communicate how it will be helping the community and developers.
Thank you.
And just to add, I have no political gain in pushing this forward. I don't think this is pushing. This is just the next logical step to make sure that we can start doing the community right and implement these things so that our processes move more smoothly and quickly. And so that we get, frankly, so we attract staff to our planning department because we have an OCP. We're not just back and forth with an open OCP and one that's not currently functioning and the community that's totally unraveled by the process. People aren't going to want to work for a planning department that is completely in shambles because of this process. So again, I think the same can be said for both sides. Holding this off is actually going to be a detriment to us.
Okay, Councillor Lajeunesse, second time.
Yeah, just to, I agree with Councillor McMath. I really don't understand the rush to get this thing done because I wasn't on council when the strat plan was developed and when the idea that the OCP was such a high priority item. But as I understand it, the reason that the OCP was such a high priority for council was that the old one had to keep being amended. And if we rush this thing through for the sake of getting it done, and then on day one, we have to start amending it again, what have we gained? Like, what's the point of that? I don't get it.
Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, I would just want to first of all clarify is this council sat down and charted their last 6 months of being in council. And it was the #1 priority was to finish the OCP. And you were part of that process. So this doesn't hatch back from before you were elected. This was the last 6 months where we set our priorities and the OCP was a #1 priority. I also I'm not trying to ram this through personally. I want to get it to a public hearing so we can hear back from people. I hear people come here and they say, oh, there's a whole bunch of other people that haven't had a chance to say. They will have that opportunity. That's what we should be doing. And if at that time it bungles down and there's too much to deal with, we don't have to go to third reading. But getting it to second reading and getting it in front of the people is exactly what we should be doing. So I do take exception that this is part of our plan, our strat plan. This is something that we all agreed to. And then all of a sudden it's not that important. So I don't know, I'm a little confused there. Anyways, I don't want to ram it through. If it's not ready to go through from the public engagement, we'll find out. That's what the public is going to tell us. And to say, well, they may not be engaged because they're busy. Well, they're busy every time. And we've done a lot of work on this. So let's put it to the public and see, and let them tell us. And you'll find out that you will have the same arguments that we're having here. The other side of it, there'll be some that are for it. There're going to be some against it. And then we will have to make a decision. That's why we're here. We make the decisions in the end. And sometimes they're difficult.
Okay.
Anyways.
Councillor St. Pierre, then Bateman.
Just to mention very briefly in terms of that certainty that I was talking about before. I think one of the things it'll also do is allow us to move forward and staff to move forward with not having to take the extra time and resources for additional open houses that realistically are not likely to change the document very greatly. I really want this to go before the land use committee with the developers. I think that's where there'll be the consultation, the back and forth. That's where you get all the experts in the room. That's where we can actually make sure the implementation works. If we don't move forward, we don't get there. And it's not what we need. I think that putting it in abeyance leaves everyone, including the developers, in a very awkward position where they don't know what's going on. Whereas if we actually move it forward, we can all come to the table, make sure that it's done right, ideally, in an ideal world. Realistically, it's not going to be ideal regardless, but this is a good way of moving forward. Personally, I am not necessarily looking forward to the emotions that are going to be running high at the open house or at this meeting. But that's why we get paid the big bucks.
Councillor Bateman.
Okay, in that strategic plan back in 2019, we set objective 3.1.2, which was to develop a new official community plan. We didn't say we would adopt one, but we said we develop. So we have in fact developed a remarkably, to me, again, a remarkably substantial piece of work here that captures community views and opinions. It's very consistent. It's a Sooke smart growth document consistent with the 2010, 2001, and all those area plans prior to it. It wants smart growth in the town center. It wants the protection of our rural lands, and it insists on modest growth outside within the sewer specified area. That's at the heart of it. When Councillor Lajeunesse says, okay, from day one, there's going to be this lineup of amendments. I'm no expert, but I don't know where those amendments would arise. And ideally, our consultants, the OCP Advisory Committee and our planning staff have caught those potential hiccups in this document. And and particularly given, okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bateman. Councillor McMath.
Councillor St. Pierre would love to have like the land use development community come forward, development groups come forward. And all the pieces that Councillor Bateman just touched on, those groups want those same pieces. The tension is coming from that the idealism and the tools that are in this OCP aren't actually going to reap those goals, those benefits. And so that's why this group we need to hear from, and not in a 2-minute blurb where as a layperson we're like, I kind of get it, and then you talk to someone whose specialty it is, it's like, well, no, this, and we're like, okay, but then you go back and it's like, no. And so the piece that's missing is the connection of those two parties. And the challenge that I have right now is we created this situation for ourselves and now we're stuck. So I'm happy to have the emotion and all the passion that it's gonna be spicy is the word that I'll use for it. But that's what happens when you can say meaningful engagement, but it's not that there wasn't an effort made in that time to reach people. That no one's saying that here. It's that there's some resources in the community that we haven't used to their potential, and they feel exasperated because they haven't had an opportunity to be that person and to have that benefit. So how that group will feel and is feeling is that it's no, you don't get it. It's fine. It's fine. It's what we want. Because we do want the same thing. They feel like they're shut out of this process. And when these two parties don't connect, you have a staff who are like, well, but that's what we're doing. But then you have the users who are saying, but that's not going to work the way that you set it up. Those groups need to join. It's how do we have those conversations and how do we use that prior to pushing a second reading? Because why I say the term pushing is because when asked the question, staff advised that other workloads would be put on hold to push this workload through. And so that's where that term push comes from.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McMath. So everyone's spoken twice. I'm just going to comment for the first time, not as lengthy as I did earlier. My piece here is on we also made a commitment to service excellence and service to our community. And that's everyone who walks in the door, from the resident getting a blue box to someone applying for a permit. And there is a slowdown in service. And we've heard that continuing on will continue to disrupt that. Yes, there are pieces in here that, I've spoke at length before about the pieces around addressing systemic racism, because that cold component shouldn't even be in here, because that to me is the fail in this document. Everything else could be fine around development, perhaps, and that's where we'll get those pieces. I never once said throw it out and start over. It's more, how do we work on this? I'm going to take you back in time to when I was finishing my first term on council and going to the second one. Some in the room may remember this. There was a case where the council of the day was pushing through a lot of different things. We're out of time. It's a 3-year term. You got to do this, push. All of that got rejected, including several sitting councillors. Myself, and I managed to survive that somehow, and along with some others. I was still wondering then, like, why are we doing all of this? Like, I can barely follow the bouncing ball here, but maybe I'm just new and I don't know what they're doing. Next council came in, start everything over, in talk of $200,000. Well, the zoning bylaw took a major hit. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees were spent. Unfortunate turnover in staff, and not much really happened, because that's all that council was doing, was taking everything apart and starting over again. I really don't want to see that happen to this community, where we're just going to toss everything and everyone out. Former mayor said that to my face. Everyone needs to go. Said it publicly, including you, including me. Everyone on council, most of the staff, just start all over. And certainly that mantra is prevailing in the local election right now. Pretty brutal comments to make, but so far I took it. There has been concerns of reputational harm, and what's true and valid, I don't really know. But again, I refer to the calls that I'm trying to field and the service delivery I'm trying to make when I'm just answering phones and trying to figure it all out, because it's not my role. So that's why I'm anxious and a bit worried. I don't want to see all this good work scrapped and lost. I want to try to save all those good pieces and work on the communication. Maybe it's the case where it won't be amendments. Maybe it's just changing the language around communication, or maybe it's just a workshop, the next council adopts it and says, okay, we just need to workshop and explain this. Like one time we did under Mr. Schaefer, a number of folks, Councillor Beddoes was here, maybe a few others, where we met with people that were having building permit slowdowns and what was going on. And we had a good conversation about that together, and things improved for a while there. So it's just the communication piece. If it's the case where, everything is fine, and that's where I get a bit confused. I can't take this and explain it to somebody that is what our staff meant, because I don't have that expertise. All I can say is someone is frustrated here. They don't quite understand what this is doing. It's to your point of connecting people together. So that's where I think I don't want to see this work lost, and I don't want to see it started over. I don't want to see our staff leave. I do want to see us get the permits out and to address anything, because that is what pays for everything that we need to do and to continue doing. And yes, I'm always available and I answer my phone, but those aren't the calls that I really want to take. So I'm not prepared to advance this at this stage. I think that we have some systems work. I think we have excellent people that are working in some cases with a poor process internally, perhaps. So let's iron that out. Through the pandemic, we've had many new staff join us. I think they all kind of need to meet because communication's been clunky. You know, separated by Zoom boxes and all those sorts of things and social distancing and not able to meet. And I think we have put a lot of pressure on our staff, you know, and we need to redo all these roads and we need to do all these things and we need to do it all now because we should have done it yesterday, but we need to do it now. And there's a grant opening, let's pursue it. Let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. And we've put a lot of things into those inboxes. And really set the bar of expectation really high. And so in that case is, okay, we've taken on too much and it's starting to hurt people and it's getting difficult and extreme weather events. We saw the impact of doing Church and Otter Point Road together at the same time and what that actually did commuting. And we have other roads that were opened by atmospheric rivers, a term I'd never used before, or a heat dome because of these massive climate events. So I get that. I just don't feel that this is a unicorn or the silver bullet to solving all of those issues that we're dealing with right now. In some cases, it's just going back to basics, clearing out inboxes, and just addressing what we need to do. I know that it may or may not even be, you know, in terms of the delegated of authority. I'm rambling a bit. Maybe some of that should be best done by staff. Maybe some of it should remain with council. So at least council become familiar with the authority that you have. And once you understand it, you can delegate it, but you don't give away your power until you fully understand what it is. It sets us back. And I've seen that, and I can speak from 14 years from being here of how it happens whenever the district goes on with something and you don't have everyone or most of many people as you can involved. I don't have a crystal ball either, but I'm just going by what I've seen occur here. Thank you. Councillor Lajeunesse, you're on a third time, so keep it tight.
Yeah, no, just to be clear, I've had people tell me that we should throw this whole thing out, and I'm not in favor of doing that. But I think we should take this, get it right before we move it forward. And that's where I'm coming from.
Go ahead.
Yes. This is my third time. I think we all want that. And I think from my perspective, going to a public hearing would give us some more clarity. And what's wrong with that? I mean, we're going to the second reading, next we'll go about public hearing. So all those things that Councillor Lajeunesse wants, I want. All those things that McMath wants, I want. But we have to hear from the public and we give them another opportunity. And what's wrong with that? We don't have to go to, if it turns out to be really bad, we don't go to third reading. But let's hear back from the public. I've heard people sit up here and say, there's people want to comment from both sides. Let them. Isn't that what we should be doing? So I'm still a little bit flabbergasted that why are we so shy? Is it because of an election and you don't want to deal with it? Or is it just a bad OCP? I keep hearing people say, no, it's not bad. Even some of the opponents to this. So let's put it to the public. We've done what we can. We've gone through this thing line by line. And let's see what the public comes back with. From the certain communities that said they didn't have an opportunity, there was. And some of them said they couldn't be bothered. Well, now they are. They get another chance. They can bring it to us. So I'm all for second reading. I mean, what's going to change? Nothing. Second reading. That's it.
Okay, we're on the motion then that council gives second reading to the official community plan bylaw number 800 2022. All those in favor? And opposed? Councillor McMath, Councillor Lajeunesse, Mayor Tate are opposed. Motion carries.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just before you move to the next motion, I was just looking at our council procedure bylaw and the motion, because it will not be held during a regular council meeting. The motion must identify the time and place of the public hearing. So we need to add that in, and we do need to put the ad in the paper first thing tomorrow morning. So I would just ask for council to make sure that they can be available for that date, because the advertisement will take place immediately. Thank you.
Okay, so that I understand would be September the 26th,
27th, the Tuesday,
27th.
and potentially the Wednesday as a carryover.
So that'll be the 27th and the 28th, and the start time would be
7 p.m.
7 p.m.
Well, actually, council can make the motion to change the time, so we can start it earlier if allow us to get in a little bit more time.
Typically, our meetings start at 7. Any public hearing is 7, so. Well, and to eat. Is anyone not available on the 27th at this particular time? Looks fine. Okay, that is a Tuesday and a Wednesday potentially. Yeah. Okay, and we also have a council meeting on the 26th. So there's a regular council meeting on the 26th, potentially a big agenda because we haven't met. I don't know. It's kind of what I'm seeing here from staff. So the 26th and the 27th. And the 20th, possibly. Yes, question?
For this ad that's going to be submitted tomorrow, is it only going to showcase the one date? Or is it going to showcase both? And in which case, how are you going to clarify to people quickly reading that should we conclude everything within the first one, the second will no longer be?
No, the ad will only be for the first date, and if we don't get through it on the 27th, council can adjourn it to the 28th as long as the time and place is identified at the meeting. There's no further need for advertising, because we don't want to separate it out and give people an opportunity to come Tuesday or Wednesday. If we get through everything on Tuesday, there's no need to have the Wednesday date. So
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. It's just if people dedicate that night to speak and then they don't have that opportunity, less than 24-hour turnaround is going to be tough.
That's the risk. That's how it goes. Really, because if we say both and we,
No, sorry,
yeah,
maybe
it
I
has
should,
to be the
it's
one.
not that I'm looking for that. It's more that like the secondary date is a following week.
Oh,
So
I
that for
see.
those that don't have the opportunity, they still have time to like rearrange plans or get their shift switched or. leave
it's
early.
the 28th is just a suggestion. Council could choose to hold it the following week on October the 4th,
The 4th, yeah.
if there's availability.
Or is it not available? Not available?
Councillor Logans?
Not by any means a good or even perfect suggestion, but perhaps at the beginning of the meeting, Mayor Tate, you could mention that if anyone, like we may have the opportunity to go to another night if it takes forever on the Tuesday, but for anyone who can only make tonight work, try to speak first. I know that's not really like ideal, but
It's kind of first to the mic.
Given the, and sorry, excuse me, given the anticipated number of people that will show up, we do anticipate putting a sign up sheet. So if people, as people come in and they want to speak, they'll sign up and then I will call them to the mic as in the order that they sign up to do that, just so that we can, given that we're going to potentially have people in 2 rooms as well. I think that's a way to try and maintain some organization throughout.
Councillor St. Pierre?
I have another potentially impractical suggestion. If the list is long enough that we estimate that there's no way to get through it, maybe an announcement can be made early on so that the people in the latter half of the list can actually go home if they want to. And that's just a thought.
You just,
That's my.
you like it, but that's sort of why the province wants to review the whole process because of that. Councillor McMahon?
To your worship, just staff, what is the process for sort of cataloging who has spoken and how many times they've spoken?
At a public hearing, there is no limit on the length of time that you can speak. It's typically up to the chair to ensure that they're bringing forward new information. If they're going to get up and say the same thing 10 times, then no, your speaking time is up. But as long as they keep bringing forward new information, they can speak as long as they wish.
And there's nothing procedurally, so person A speaks for 45 minutes, B speaks for 5, and then A goes up again. There's no way to manage that?
No, I would suggest that we put rules in place that each speaker has 5 minutes and then they go to the back of the line. And then when everybody has had their 5 minutes, if they still feel that they need to speak again, they can come up again.
That's the challenge though with public hearings is you really cannot do that. You know, it's more the case, you know, as I've done in others, it's like all first time speakers, then you sort of invite the second. Because usually something said the first time could trigger, oh, I forgot to mention or other things. And that's where folks will want to speak for a second time or so on. But I worry about capping the, you know, right off the bat by saying, you know, when, you know, we're going to restrict the time to speak when we've have not allowed people to speak at all. I can't, I would really, really struggle to do that. I get it from a management piece, but that's the problem, right?
We have the right to do that. And I think that actually probably helps feed into the procedural fairness in that you're giving everybody an opportunity to speak, not sit and wait for somebody that speaks for 45 minutes and then, you know, maybe a whole bunch of people have to leave and don't get any opportunity at all. So it's probably 6 to 1, half a dozen to the other, but we can talk about how to manage that.
Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, I don't think any process is perfect, but is a process that we've used for public hearings. And I just think we stick with the same process. And if it starts to bog down, that's what I said before, if somebody's there legitimately trying to bog it down, that's when the chair has to make a ruling. But I mean, we have the procedure, it's already there. Let's use the tried and true procedure and let people need the opportunity to speak. And that's what we're all on the same page for that, is communications. And we'll give them the opportunity. And if it bogs down in 10 days of speaking, obviously we don't go to third reading. So, yeah. So, anyways, I'm okay with the process. I mean, it's all about communications and we're going to be communicating with the public, and that's a good thing. Whether I like what they say or not, it's another thing, but that's okay. They have to have their day as well. So I'm okay with the procedure. It's just, you know, let's not overcomplicate it by trying to make all these changes. We don't know. There might be 3 speakers. There might be 300 speakers. It's hard to say. Let's find out.
Yep. Councillor St. Pierre?
I wasn't sure if it was a point of order or not, but at this point, we don't have a motion, but I think I'll make the motion that a public hearing be scheduled at 7 p.m. on September 27th, 2022 and October 4th, 2022 in accordance.
No, don't add in the October 4th date. Just leave the first one.
Okay, I thought we had to mention them both. Okay.
Can we just look to see if we're all available for the 4th?
We can do that after. In accordance with the Local Government Act for the Official Community Plan Bylaw number 800, 2022.
Okay, so that's the public hearing for September 7th at 7 p.m. moved by Councillor St. Pierre. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor McMath. Discussion?
Already have lots.
Yeah, a lot has been said.
Just
Councillor
change
Bateman.
plan to plant to plan. that, resolution.
Oh my God.
Oh, my. Okay. I didn't even see that. Thank you. Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, the mayor's opposed. The motion is carried. Yes. In terms of October 4th, yeah. There isn't a Sea Park Commission meeting anymore. Okay, there's just a placeholder in the calendar. So at this point, looks good. My day starts at 5:30 then, so that'll be an interesting day. Okay. Next meeting is the council adjourn the meeting. Moved by Councillor St. Pierre, seconded by Councillor Logans. All those in favor? That's unanimous. That's a wrap. Thank you, everyone. And thank you for your contributions.